Ah, the beautiful No Quan Desert, a very sunny place full of vibrant life, also including, but not limited to, horrific death. The desert is absolutely littered with sun-bleached bones and rotten corpses. But more importantly, it is also home to the SNR Rifle Company, the largest independent defense company / war merchant on the entire planet. What's that? What planet, you ask? Why, of course, the planet of Degum. One that has been ravaged by a multi-decade war between two governing powers known as the RimWorld Marshal Service and the United Rebel Forces, as well as many more smaller and somewhat neutral factions. The two main factions have been at war until recently, that is. They actually just signed a peace treaty, which is a little bit of a problem for us as warlords because that means we now need to find new clientele, especially since our weapon lockers are completely filled to the brim with bow and arrows, firearms, knives, swords, blunt weaponry, anything you could think of really. Luckily though, we do still have our great big mercenary Holland mule, known as the one and only Shinichi's Pride. As you may notice, there are some little animations coming off of it, and I have a feeling that has something to do with this save being from the previous version of RimWorld and all of the mods that I have installed. So just be fair warned that if you are trying to play along and use all these mods, it might not work at all. Anywho though, I decided that a good research project for us might be enlisted uniforms, which will actually allow us to create a smorgasbord of different types of uniforms. Because even when factions are no longer at war, they still have to be able to dress their soldiers, do they not? This could be the perfect business opportunity. We would immediately have our scientist Downs begin working on this extensive research, and it actually didn't take but a day or so, and she had it completed for us. With the research completed, all we would really need now is a proper tailoring room, which we swiftly built, and we actually ended up equipping it with 4 separate tailoring benches, making it possible for us to have quite the output of uniforms. The only thing holding us back now is materials. In the meantime, however, we would end up collecting our taxes from all of our settlements in the Outlands, giving us a hefty sum of silver in our treasury. It looks like a lot now, but if we were to have to bribe one of these all-powerful global factions, we could burn through it pretty quickly. Just in case any of you are new here, I should make it clear that this is the second season of this series, but not to worry, if you don't feel like going back and watching the first season, you shouldn't have to, as I feel like I've recapped the main points pretty well already. Basically, we're a global war merchant and the wars are fading away. But I also bring this up because if you're not new here and you did watch season 1, you're probably wondering where is everyone, as our roster of people is a bit lower than usual. Well, it just so happens that at the end of last season, after it was all said and done, I dispersed all of our remaining colonists among our settlements in the Outlands to help reinforce them, but also to increase their production. But many of them, such as Otto, that we were very fond of, have stayed at the Citadel, our stronghold in the Outlands, still serving our great empire ever true. But not only did we leave many of our soldiers in the Outlands, we also basically left all of our vehicles except for our Wisent Shinichi's Pride that will carry all of our weapons and soldiers that we do have here. Because of this, we decided that we would begin working on some new car parts, that way we could go ahead and start building new vehicles, though this will take a little bit of time, of course. Late into the night though, we received intel that one of our settlements was in danger. It would seem that the Citadel was about to be attacked by the Thromboian Union, a traditional group of highly skilled and very well-equipped tribespeople. The Citadel should be completely fine though, as we have a fine defending force there. It was just a bit strange to see that they were attacking the Citadel head on, and then I realized that we too were being raided. Coming in at the dead of night, a very large group of the Thromboian Union wearing brown and grayish black attire. Quite a bit different than the usual bright colored attire that we see them in. I don't know if this is an attempt at camouflage or if they're really just changing their style. Either way though, this could be a bit of a problem, especially since it would appear that they have their very own makeshift weapons. This is something we've never seen from this tribe before, as they never break out of their traditional weapons and armor. Well, either way, we're not too worried about it. They can't attack us with their new little weapons if there's nothing left of them. That's assuming we can actually hit our target with our mortars, which unfortunately we weren't really able to do. I did, however, receive notification that these bastards killed our lifter, named Heavy Duty. He was in the middle of taking out the trash and they blasted him into scrap metal. We'll make sure they pay for that. After a few hours of planning their attack and killing our lifter, these sons of bitches would start coming right for us. Hiding behind our turrets and embrasures would give us a good edge against our enemies, that and our superior firearm technology, of course. But we were still very heavily outnumbered. And even our turrets wouldn't last very long in this firefight. Richard, Scott, Commando, and the others would be able to flank the enemy for a hot moment there as they were attempting to attack our turrets, but they quickly realized that they too were going to be overwhelmed by these numbers. In an act of heroism and also desperation, our slave Machu would take Shinichi's pride out and try to attack our enemies with it by running them over, but it stalled out in the sand and was destroyed. Machu himself would also be taken down shortly thereafter. During all of the chaos, it would seem that the tribespeople were very unorganized and were actually beginning to run around carelessly, giving us the opportunity to blast many of them straight into hell. Though it should be noted that some of them were indeed using our defenses against us. Right in the middle of the battle, we received notification that yet another of our settlements in the Outlands was being attacked by the Thromboian Union once more. It would seem that this is a coordinated attack that has been planned out many months in advance. Either way though, we are still in the tail end of this battle, and even if they were to kill us, we will take as many of them to hell with us as we can. Though it seems that that won't be the case today, as they were beginning to retreat, and we too would actually make a strategic retreat into our tunnels here to try and stay away from any stray bullets. This would also give us an ample opportunity to begin trying to tend to our wounded as they were making their way out of our territory, taking down all of our doors and even some of our electronics like our solar panels. And yes, as you can see, it is true they done one hell of a number on our base, but as long as nobody died, I'm not too concerned with it. We can always rebuild, but one thing we cannot do is resurrect. The Thromboian Union might be an enemy to all factions on this planet, including ourselves, but by God do they fight with honor and nobility, and they are extremely fierce, even with such pitiful scrap weapons. I mean, imagine if they had some good guns, like the kind that maybe we could sell to them. An interesting idea. They must be becoming quite desperate if they're trying to make their own weapons out of scrap metal, perhaps running low on their traditional weaponry and supplies. Imagine what kind of damage they could do if they had some of our quality firearms. This could be a good opportunity to stir up some chaos and make some money. Sadly, after the battle was over, I realized that Scott would now be joining Richard in the One Eye Club. Those scrap rifles are pretty dog shit compared to what we have, but they're still pretty darn dangerous. I should be grateful that they didn't have any high quality weapons, otherwise it probably would have went out the back of his head and taken some of his brain with him. Scott's demise not taking place wasn't the only good news. We did also manage to take one of the Thromboian tribespeople as a prisoner. They don't have that great of skills, but they do have a burning passion in construction, which is good for any new hands that we're going to hire, or brainwash into becoming a mercenary. The reason being, of course, is because we have a lot of repairs to do each time we end up getting attacked, and being a global powerhouse, that happens pretty often, unfortunately. We were now in the midst of cleaning up after that major battle, which did include hauling in all of those awful weapons that I've been yapping about for the past 5 or 10 minutes. Who knows, maybe we'll be able to find some unlucky sods who are willing to purchase these pieces of trash off of us. But as we all know, there won't be much trading if we don't have any vehicle to load up our goods into and to, well, take out the trade, so we're going to begin working on a new smuggler airplane. Just as well, while that's in construction, Richard would actually begin working on a brand new bionic eye for Scott. As you can see though, this is unlike any of the bionics that Richard has made prior. This one is special and has been especially made for Scott in particular. A very delicate and time-consuming surgery, but thanks to Richard's very high medical skill, it wasn't an issue and everything went completely fine. And take a gander at that new right eye. Damn, looking very very dapper old man. Muy guapo, papi, muy guapo. By morning, we had also finally finished our new smuggler airplane, which is going to need a fantastic name if you guys would like to provide some in the comments, and I'll pick and choose. Before we would send Scott out on any diplomatic trade missions in the new plane, though, I wanted to keep him here so he could help us with our repairs and construction. I wanted to at least try to get 1 or 2 of our turrets back online before he left, just to ensure that we have appropriate protection while he's gone. In the meantime, though, that night, we ended up having a group from the Oak Foundation who came to visit, I suppose. It would appear that they were actually scouting out the base, possibly keeping an eye on our movements. In case you're new here, the Oak Foundation is a separate faction all on its own, but they're kind of like the real-world equivalent of the CIA to the rebel forces. And one thing is for sure, if we're able to see them, it's because they want us to see them. Perhaps they are trying to send a message. Well, either way, it would seem that our defenses are now at least somewhat up to snuff, so I'm going to send Scott out on a trade mission to the Thromboian Union. Now hear me out, because I know what you're thinking. Rat Knight, they're your enemies. They're not going to trade with you, and even if they were willing to trade with you, why would you want to sell guns to your enemies? Well, my friends, not only do we come with guns to trade, but we also come with a peace offering in the form of 10,000 silver. Well, would you look at that? If I would have known giving them a bunch of silver like that would have made them our allies, well, I probably still wouldn't have done it because I like silver. Now that we've offered them our peace offering of all that silver, we can actually do some proper trading with them, and we would end up selling them several of our guns and other types of melee weapons, and we would actually end up purchasing a few of their tribal items just to show good faith. Then it was time for Scott to make the long journey all the way back home. Finally, he would end up arriving, and it was time for us to drop off everything that we had gotten. Now, if you're upset that I gave them all that silver, it may please you to know that we basically got over half of it back when trading, so, you know, I mean, there's that. We are devious indeed. We would focus on building our defenses once more and repairing them, as they still weren't finished even up until this point, and I only bring it up because I suppose I've just gotten a bit spoiled with having so many members that this type of thing doesn't take very long at all. I do have a little bit of a solution in mind, but first we're going to be putting our lifter, Heavy Duty, that was killed by the Thromboian tribespeople, in a mech gestator to bring him back to life, and then we get on with the solution. I'm going to be gestating a few construction mechs. They don't take near as long compared to trying to recruit pawns, and of course they only require resources, which at the moment we still have plenty of. Speaking of which, we are also going to be expending some of those resources on some proper weapon production so that we may trade them to our new allies once more. Our current production is going to be riot shields that are made out of steel. Pretty self-explanatory, I would think. These are going to help the Thromboians defend themselves while firing at their enemies. The current weapon that we've chosen to produce is BB guns. No, you did not hear me incorrectly, BB guns. Yes, the kind that shoot very small pellets that don't actually do damage. Now, I'm not trying to trick the tribespeople or anything like that by giving them BB guns. No, these are going to actually be practice rifles. Hear me out on this. An adult Thromboian can carry an assault rifle, yes, but a child cannot, and that's where the BB gun comes into play. This will help them train their younger members how to use firearms properly. Yes, I know, I'm a genius, I get it. No, but on a serious note, I do feel that it is a very realistic option for them to practice. Something else we would begin doing is using one of our growing rooms for nothing but cotton. The reason that we're going to do that is so that we can get some cloth and continue our production of uniforms for the factions that are no longer at war. After that, I noticed that our armory was completely overflowing and all the riot shields and BB guns that we had been making couldn't fit, so we began working on plenty of new shelves, weapon lockers, as well as a brand spanking new weapon rack to put them all in. Our 2 pet iguanas, Blood Diamond and Iguana 1, who needs a name, were sleeping out in our barn for whatever reason. I could have swore we built them beds last season, but apparently not, so we ended up building some in Scott and Richard's room, and it looks like they're all much more comfortable now. The iguanas have a much warmer, safer place to stay at night, and Scott and Richard get those nice, scaly, cuddly cuddles. Very early in the morning, before the sun had even come up, we began loading up the smuggler airplane with many of the weapons we had in storage, as well, of course, as the BB guns and shields that we had made. Commando Jr. would be flying this bad Mama Jamma back over to the Thromboian Union settlements to do a little bit of trading and drop off their weapons, yada yada, you know the drill. He was on his way there, but but it's going to take a hot minute. And in the meantime, some other interesting things would happen back at the HQ. Our lifter, Heavy Duty, was back in business and revived, and we had also finished up gestation on a constructoid. He may not look like much, but this little fella, or lass, it's a robot, would be very proficient at repairing our defenses. Finally though, Commando Jr. would begin trading with the Thromboian tribes once more. Shockingly though, they would end up buying our BB guns, but had no interest in the riot shields. Truthfully, we could have contacted them ahead of time to see if they would be willing to buy these, but we didn't, and now we need to find somebody else to purchase them. Speak of the devil, it would appear that we have a combat supplier coming in from the Outlands, although I've never heard of this faction before. Known as the Forgotten. Now, factions do pop up in the Outlands very frequently, and most of the time they're just simply scavengers or some other type of criminal organization. But this group in particular was made up of deserters and veterans from both the United Rebel Forces and the RimWorld Marshal Service. Very unique indeed. But either way, to simplify things, they came here looking to purchase some guns, and by God, we're going to sell them some guns, as well as some melee weapons, even clubs. They were extremely under-equipped. And because of that, they were willing to buy just about any of the shitty weapons that we had. Desperation is our specialty. I wish them luck in whoever they plan on attacking or encountering with those weapons. By God, with those scrap rifles, they're gonna need all the luck they can get. Though, I do wonder if supplying a militia group that is made up from deserters from both large factions on the planet will piss them off. It'll probably be fine. A little bit of time later, and Commando Jr. had finally made it back home with some resources that we got from the tribespeople, as well as all the riot shields they wouldn't purchase. I did check, and even the Forgotten didn't want them, unfortunately, so I guess they're ours. But on to something a little bit more interesting, we ended up purchasing something called Metal Blood Serum from the tribespeople. No doubt some type of hippy-dippy concoction, but supposedly they said it'll help us be more impervious to damage during battle, so we'll give it a shot. Speaking of shots as well, Scott here would be taking a few pot shots at some nearby gazelle. It's actually quite rare that we get packs of animals in the desert, and it is a nice little occasion because we get to supplement a lot of the plant matter that we make our food out of for some nice meaty protein. But not only that, a pack of gazelle would also give us plenty of plain leather, which we can use for our uniform production. And when we got a bit low on all of our leathers, we could stitch them together into a patch leather, which would allow us to make more naturally. And we had some humble beginnings to our little stockpile of uniforms. Now those damn bastards are going to have to dye them themselves. We don't have that kind of time. Now something tells me though, with this peace treaty going on, the Forgotten and the Thromboian Union will be our biggest customers, or at least that's how it seems. So maybe, just maybe, if we can get the rebels and marshals dependent on us for uniforms, maybe some other items, they won't get pissed off and attack us for supplying their enemies. Now while still loosely on the topic of the uniforms, we would actually end up harvesting our cotton plants finally a few days later, and we would use that cloth to begin making more and more of said uniforms. Now by this point we felt like we had enough to make a pretty penny, so we would actually begin stocking the plane with them so that we could fly them out and begin selling them, to which of course we would do. Now I do know that there's the peace treaty and whatnot, but I'm sure there's still a little bit of animosity between the two factions, so I didn't want to show favoritism towards one side or the other, so I would end up trying to sell about half of the uniforms to the marshals and half to the rebels, so that way it's even. However, on our way back home, we would end up picking up a rebel distress signal near the Outlands, just on the outskirts of the Union's territory. Faction bombardment. We would end up sending Scott down there just in case after the battle to maybe try and scavenge some of the weapons. Because remember my friends, a used gun is brand spanking new to a new client. Ain't no shame in my game, baby. Upon our arrival, even from the sky as we flew over before landing, we could see that this Thromboian village was in complete and utter chaos. A hellish, gruesome battle in every sense of the word. It would appear that rebel forces were attempting to take the village for whatever reason, but were completely caught off guard by the Thromboians' new technology. Who could have sold them that? It wouldn't take very long at all for the rebels to have their asses completely handed to them. I think the problem here for them was they were relying a little bit too much on their hunter mechanoids to help them out. They did, however, have one brave soul in the form of Orion, who wasn't giving up that easy. The lone protagonist taking on an army of enemy soldiers behind enemy lines. Or at least I'm sure that's how he saw himself. To these poor tribespeople, he was an invasive species. A foreigner from another planet here to take everything they had, and they would not give up their home easily. Oh well, maybe they'll build a statue or some monuments to him or something. But as for this battle, it would appear that the rebels are all dead, and as are their mechanoids, sure to be smashed up and turned into some type of something for the tribespeople, I'm sure. And we officially declare ourselves the victor, as we are going to be swooping in with our plane to collect a few guns, as well as knives and anything else that they've dropped that we can take. And boy howdy, let me tell you, did they drop them. We got shotguns, we got shivs, we got grenades, swords, rifles, and everything in between. Now comes the hard part, which is loading all of it into the looks like we're already back home, and we're going to be unloading it. Now we have all of our helpers here, our soldiers, to load it back into our armory so that we can sell it. Perhaps a group like the Forgotten will come from the Outlands and wish to buy things from us once more. I highly doubt that they would mind any second-hand weapons. In the meantime, however, we are going to be working on some new research. I've decided that we would begin on some advanced solar power generators. And yes, we do already have advanced geothermal power generators unlocked, but we only have so many steam geysers on the map, and the sun is almost always present during the day. We are in the desert after all. We would have Downs go ahead and begin working on said research, though that will take quite a bit of time as it's a hefty project. In the meantime, as we're researching that, to kind of go with our expanding base and expanding power grid, I thought it might be best for us to build some large advanced batteries as well as a small one, but we ran out of advanced components, so we just built more large batteries. Eventually, once we have the resources, I'd like to make this room much larger with more of the advanced batteries, as they are, of course, much more efficient. Later on into the night, we were working around the clock on building some new forms of lighting around the base. That way we can ensure efficient visibility throughout all of the darkness. We don't want any uninvited guests sneaking in now, do we? Ugh, speaking of which, it would appear that we have an entire pack of man-hunting cougars that have been affected by scaria coming down from the desert mountains to, well, try to eat us alive, it would seem. We in the professional business call this a little bit of, oh shit, that's not good, kind of situation. Well, nevertheless, these rotten kitty cats were coming right for us. Now, luckily, our flame turrets and bear traps were doing quite a number on them, as were our rifles. But that being said, there were a lot of these no-good putty cats, so the cleanup effort here is going to take a few hours, no doubt. The battlefield was full of blood, sweat, and even a little bit of tears and some bullet casings, as the night was filled with the hefty groans of many a cougar. Make with that information what you will. Either way, it would appear that we've won. Sorry, kitty. Now it's time for the cleanup, though. We're going to have to haul all these rotten corpses away and all the non-rotten ones in so that we could chop them up and eat them, as well as put out fires and rearm our traps. After that, I decided it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and begin expanding our treasury, as we have some big plans in store in terms of our silver. As it stands right now, we do get a lot of money from the taxes of our settlements in the Outlands who have been selling guns on our behalf, and of course we plan on making more and more money by doing that ourselves here as well. So as one might imagine, all this extra room here, we've essentially doubled our storage capacity in the treasury, is going to be very much needed. We have big plans, big plans. As for our weapon production, I've decided to begin working on some flame-based weapons, as they do fetch a pretty penny. And the best thing about the incendiary launchers is they don't actually require kin fuel to be created. Meaning, of course, we spend the same amount of time, but less resources for the same type of weapon, which is nice. We would once again have the Forgotten coming to visit us from the Outlands, and this time around they looked a little different. It seems that they've recently been in some sort of combat. It seems the majority of them have suffered several injuries. Well, I hope they're not coming here for refunds on their last purchase, because one, we don't do refunds, and two, we'll completely destroy them. Upon conversing with him further, it would seem that they came to buy more weapons of even higher quality. That way they don't lose just like they did in their last battle battle, or so we're assuming. Funny enough though, they actually had some items of interest that we wanted, some components and a chainsaw. And of course we also made just over 1,000 silver off of them. But now this chainsaw was of particular interest, unlike any that we had ever seen before. It was apparently made from a material called, let me check my notes, bioferrite. Never heard of her, but this bad son of a bitch was extremely durable. As you can see, we actually decided to test it out against the side of this mountain, and it done quite a number on it without any number being done on the chainsaw itself. Now by this point we had finished up our extensive research into advanced solar panels, and we were now going to begin researching autocannon turrets, which I can't believe we haven't done already. But either way, once we finally complete this research, which shouldn't take very long, we'll unlock 4 different types of autocannon turrets, 2 of which are actually handheld, and we'll be able to sell them after mass producing them some time later. And I also noticed that the relations between the Marshall settlements and the United Rebel Forces with us were beginning to decline, even though they had a tendency to go towards goodwill. Perhaps a bad omen or foreshadowing for what is to come in our relationships with them. After that, one of our settlements in the Outlands was under attack by the Confederacy of Banya. Just in case we do have some newbies among us today, or in case you need a little bit of a refresher, the Confederacy of Banya is actually another of the more dominant tribal factions. We have the Thromboian Union and then them. Not that it was actually all that pressing of an issue, of course, as we did have quite a large defending force that we would assign to the settlement, and everything should be hunky-dory. With that over with, it was time for us to begin working on our very first advanced solar panel, which we only could build one of, unfortunately, because we didn't have enough advanced components, but, you know, we'll get around to building more. Even though we do have a bit of a lack of resources at the moment, we weren't lacking in a few car parts, and I decided to make a few extra. That way we could go ahead and finish off a Traveler for Scott, which is his and the Empire's very first muscle car. Now, I know what you're thinking. I probably should have expended those resources to try and rebuild a Wissant like our Shinichi's Pride that we previously had, but I was afraid we wouldn't have enough, and I don't know, I really like the muscle car, to be honest. Besides, this unnamed hot rod can be used in combat. I mean, just look at that grill. Diabolical. But that's enough about cars. This isn't the car empire, it's the gun empire, and we're going to be working on plenty of more guns. Well, actually, we're going to be working on the things that go in guns, i.e. ammo. We are going to make absolutely sure that our new tribal allies, as well as any other faction that has the silver, has enough ammo to do whatever they wish. A bit of time later, though, we had finally recruited the one Thromboian that we took prisoner earlier in the episode, known as Gak Rigik, I believe, although I'm just going to call him Gak for now, for short. We would quickly send our new compadre here into the armory to equip himself to defend his new home if he were to need to do so. We gave him a shield, a pistol, a rifle, and even a traditional Thromboian hammer. No doubt he'll need to take some time to get used to such high-quality firearms, but something tells me he's already quite skilled with that melee weapon. I also remembered that we had a Toxalope that I had promptly named Mistake in the last season, who was currently starving to death because, well, I had forgot about him, as I had mentioned there. But yeah, luckily I remembered to feed him before he ended up dying. There's always next time. But now it's time for us to really begin buckling down and just kind of locking in on producing ammo and weapons. We would continue stockpiling the same industrial ammo that we have been making, as it is quite cheap. We would also begin producing some auto pistols as well as a few steel axes as well. Not exactly what I would call big ticket items that are going to fetch us pounds and pounds of silver, but they are what people need, I suppose. Especially for smaller and maybe less fortunate factions, we'll say. This may be all that they could really afford from us. But I mean, what else is there really for us to do? This peace treaty has really limited our clientele as well as our production of weapons, or at least the quality of the weapons that we can produce and the different types. Gang members and freedom fighters don't exactly go around buying Apache helicopters or anything of that sort, unfortunately. I will also say that I really hope the weapons that we have been selling and the people that we've been selling them to don't get too chaotic because, well, we're not exactly the most diplomatically charismatic types. I'm sure they won't cause too much trouble though, right? Right? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series. Today, my friends, we continue expanding our empire and company across the planet, as well as making plenty of moolah off of our new clientele. And the two of them kind of go hand in hand, so as I'm sure most of you recall from the end of last episode, we had a lot of weapons as well as plenty of ammunition made up, and we were going to go out and trade that, so that's what we plan on doing right now. We're going to load all of our product up into our smuggler airplane, and then Commando Jr. is going to fly it over towards the Outlands as well as to the Thromboian Union to just try and sell it to whoever wants it, really. Now, of course, I'm going to level with you. We don't exactly have any preferences for who we're willing to sell these weapons to, as long as they don't turn them back on us before we leave, or after that, of course. Our moral standards are extremely low, so as long as they have the silver to pay, we're down for it. Interestingly enough, I had actually bought a pig off of the Thromboian Union. I was going to bring it home and keep it as a pet, but I guess we couldn't fit it inside the plane, so we actually ended up leaving it back at their settlement. And I guess it's just going to starve to death now, I don't know. Classic oopsie daisy. A little bit of time later though, when we had finally arrived back home, we pulled the plane into the hangar and dumped out all of our cargo. Most of it was silver. We had a little bit of gold, some tobacco product, plasteel, normal steel, components, yada yada, and even a little bit of juggernaut serum. Speaking of silver though, our treasury is becoming quite the little pot-bellied pig. Now, like I mentioned in episode 1 though, we probably will end up burning through this pretty fast, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. As for now though, we have just finished up our extensive research into autocannon turrets, allowing us to build a normal one as well as a double one, and then also some handheld autocannon turrets as well. With that completed, we would also begin researching gun links. Now, gun links don't cost that much in terms of the amount of resources, but the resources that they do require are quite expensive. Although, even with that being said, I do feel that they would be the perfect accessory to sell to our Thromboian companions, as they're not exactly very adept at aiming. While Downs is toiling away in her lab working on gun link research, we would actually begin working on our defenses and building some new autocannons to go along with them, trying to incorporate the new designs. Even though they're a little bit more expensive than the standard autocannon, I decided to go with some double ones. You can think of them like the standard autocannon turret, but times 2. Now, with that completed, earlier I was talking about expanding the empire, and that is going to be true on the world map, but that also will include expanding the base itself here for the HQ. And one way that we're going to be doing that is by mining out yet another large section here and adding in plenty of growing zones. That way we can grow more crops. This was interrupted, however, by the splendid news that we had completed our research into gun links, and now of course we can create those. But that little manufacturing project is going to have to wait, because for right now we have plenty of coffee to begin planting. No, your ears did not deceive you. I did indeed say coffee plants. Now, we're going to be growing these and brewing coffee, because drinking coffee should increase, I believe, our manipulation, but I believe also will definitely increase our speed. Either way, this should really increase our production for sure, either way. In the meantime, we would also have Downs go ahead and begin gestating 2 brand new constructoid mechs, as I had mentioned in the previous episode as well, to help out with repairs and just really construction in general. During this time as well, we began producing our very first mech link, which actually took much longer than I had previously expected, but of course it was finished and it is now ready to be worn and or sold, whatever we plan to do with it. Now, by this point, our treasury was packed to the absolute gills, and all this silver was burning a hole in our pocket, so it's time for us to begin spending it. Up until this point, all of our production settlements for our guns and munition mines have all been in the Outlands, which does indeed make sense, but I think it's time we bring some of those to our area around the HQ, further expanding our influence and empire in the region. Now, it is worth mentioning though that in doing so, this really stressed the relations between us, the Marshals, and the Rebels just a little bit. Relations with the Rebels have dropped significantly, while relations with the Marshal Service has only decreased in about half. I mean, really, it's their fault that we have to settle these new areas near the headquarters anyhow. If they're not going to be buying our best products like our weapons, we have to make money somehow. And that's why we've settled these new areas, as well as why we're upgrading them all, not only the ones near the HQ, but the ones back in the Outlands as well, to just try to further increase production as well as their military capacity. And as you can see, after all the upgrading and settling was done, we are quite a bit shorter on silver than we were before. Like I mentioned, we would begin burning through it quite quickly, but that's quite alright. It is well worth it. I did, however, feel like we needed some proper security measures inside the treasury itself, since it is growing quite large and is containing literally the entire sum of our empire's wealth. However, it's worth noting these turrets that we built on the inside were no normal turrets. No, they were actually ceiling-mounted mini-turrets, making them a bit harder to spot by any ne'er-do-wells. I also noticed that the pig that we purchased previously and left behind in the tribal territory wasn't dead. Apparently it's not going to starve to death, and I don't know why I thought it would this soon, because it can indeed graze. Perhaps we should send out a rescue mission. Maybe. I'll try not to forget to do that, but for now we have some other things that we need to focus on, such as this new shelf that I'm actually going to be adding to our pillbox here, where we defend the base normally. Now, specifically, this new shelf that we have built is going to be for our serums, such as Juggernaut Serum and Metal Blood Serum, because this is, as mentioned, where we always go to defend the base, and we're going to be right next to them, so they're there if we need them, essentially. Some time later, we ended up having a trader from the Outlands coming to visit and looking to buy some of our wonderful firearms and ammunition, I'm sure. They weren't affiliated with any faction, but of course we would do some trading with them, at which time I realized that they had plenty of car parts for sale. As for most car parts, we could build them on our own, but it would be much easier to go about buying them, but some of them we actually couldn't even build because we need to go on the roads looking for wrecked vehicles, as is part of the mod, and that's just something we haven't had time to do yet. Thanks to the parts that we had purchased, though, we would be able to build a brand new type of truck. However, in the middle of constructing said truck, we would have a little bit of an issue. I'm afraid to say that a group of insectoids have burrowed in stasis cocoons just outside of our defenses because of our tox packs that are in the area laying out on the ground. I knew this could happen, but I'd still let it happen like a fool. Well, there's not really any point in dwelling on it now. It's already happened, and we have a huge group of insectoids to take down. It would appear that they have surrounded Min, and they would quickly take her down as well. It would now be up to the others to attempt to rescue her, assuming that is that they'll even be able to withstand the bug onslaught themselves, which given the amount of them is asking for a lot. Shinichi, on the other hand, was putting in a hell of a lot of work with his chainsaw though. It really did help us out tremendously though that the Outlanders were willing to help us. Not that they really had that much of a choice, as the insectoids were trying to kill them as well. Still though, the sentiment was nice and the teamwork really helped. As we and the Outlanders were keeping the insectoids busy, Shinichi would sneak down around our defenses and try to rescue Min, which he did end up successfully doing, thank God. And then by this point, our mercenaries, along with the help from the Outlanders, had defeated the bugs, except for the ones that were lying on the ground that needed stabbed in the head a few times, but we didn't mind helping them. With the battle finally over with and everyone back in their rooms in the base trying to heal up, our constructoid would actually end up finishing our new truck, and boy oh boy is this a splendid little ride. The perfect mule for hauling our mercenaries as well as any resources around, though we will need a name for it. Speaking of which, last episode I asked you wonderful people for some wonderful names for our current vehicles as well as our iguana, and one of the first names that we actually have here today is for Scott's muscle car, and we are going to be naming it the Outrunner. A cool ass name from our cool ass friend Caden Short 254. It is apparently a Borderlands reference, but I never played the game, but I've seen it. But thank you for the name, I love it. Next up, we have our smuggler airplane, which we are going to be promptly naming the Eye. Now, we were given two choices here by our friend, the Eye or Scott's Eye. Well, Radiant Peace 8457, I've decided to go with the Eye instead of Scott's Eye, simply because mascot, in my opinion, is less militaristic and more diplomatic, I guess, so we don't exactly want his name striking fear, I suppose. We just want him well known. And also, I just like the eye better, I guess. Last but not least, we will also be naming Iguana 1 Parthenax. A really solid ass name. I really like this one as probably one of my favorites, especially since the iguana is basically plain white, just as Parthenax. And we have our friend Kraken Egg 6261 to thank for that, so thank you ever so much, and thank you to everyone who submitted names. I always really appreciate the suggestions you guys make, especially for names and everything, and I have a really good time even looking at them. Even if they don't get chosen, just know that I do very much enjoy them, of course, and I do try to look at all of them. Now, with all that being said, though, after some time had passed, we had finally gestated 2 of our Constructoid mechs, and I think for now that'll be all that we add, as we do need to build some rechargers, and we're running a bit low on resources, so I essentially don't want to build too many mechs and we not have enough charging stations for them. But even with just the 2 that we currently have, we should be able to do some construction as well as repairs much faster now. Now, by this point, our coffee plants had fully grown and were ready to be harvested. Don't mind the flashing power outage there. We were experiencing an eclipse and it was causing a few problems. It would seem we'll need to make some more improvements to our power grid, but for now we have coffee to brew, baby. Nothing like a warm cup of joe to get the blood pumping and to get us energized to go and produce some more weapons. Well, actually, in particular this time we're working on some helmets that only require some plasteel, some components, and a little bit of metallic resources, which we are using rebar concrete for because, well, we're running just a tiny bit dry on steel and other resources, I'm afraid. Now, we could most definitely send out a team and set up camp and begin trying to mine some of these resources, but since we don't have a lot of mercenaries under our control here at the HQ, that's going to take a really long time. So instead, I've decided to go out and trade with the Marshal Service as well as the Rebels, even though, as you can see, the plane doesn't really have that high of a cargo capacity, so we barely get any steel back, but that's okay, I guess. We'll just have to make several trips. Trading with the Marshals and the Rebels should also help us keep at the very least some decent relations with them. In the meantime, though, while we're doing that, we're also going to be working on some Molotov cocktails that don't require any steel. They do require chem fuel, though, so we'll have to continue purchasing more of that and making some out of what little bit of wood we have. Now, I have noticed a little bit of a shift in the tension around the base between Downs and her husband, Richard. Yeah, if you're new here, maybe you don't know that they're actually married, or perhaps you forgot. They were taking a little bit of a break and sleeping in separate rooms for quite a while there after Richard found out that Downs was cheating on him with one of our Neanderthal slaves. But it would appear that they are now making up and things are somewhat hunky-dory. Well, not quite. Rulant is still considered her lover. Something needs to be done about that. Rulant was initially enslaved as part of his punishment for being Downs' little honey mustard suckle. But that's not good enough now. Being the grand rifle company that we are and making the allies that we have so many other punishments in store. And as you can see, Rulant is no longer in the slave quarters. He is now in our prison, and as a prisoner, we can do whatever we please with him. Well, we could anyways, but this is more symbolic. We've recently heard that the Citadel is setting up a labor camp in the Outlands for mining and farming, and just anything in between, really, cleaning up the shit in their new stables. So that's where we're going to be sending him. With Rulant gone, there would be no one to come between the love and the spark that is Richard and Downs. Well, except for this extremely large group of raiders, or groups, I should say, from the Confederacy of Banya. I'm sure they would love to get in between all of us and maybe cut off our faces or something. One of them is actually the father of Greffus, our mercenary. It's a real family reunion. But something tells me that her father isn't coming over for a glass of sweet tea. No, I think he might be coming to kill us with all the rest. The first group had arrived, and we immediately got to see our autocannons in action against some humanoid figures. Needless to say, we were not let down by their performance, though most of the murders were still taking place by all of our members that were hiding out in the pillbox under their ample cover, hidden behind our diabolical embrasures. Eventually, we had killed enough of them that the first group decided to flee like the cowards they are back into the desert dunes. The second group of raiders was faring a bit better against our defenses as they were just out of reach from our mercenaries, unfortunately. This would be the reason that the turret on the side always has to be replaced, as they seem to just crowd around it and destroy it before coming to get their asses kicked. However, this did give us an opportunity to look throughout their ranks, and we managed to find two impids who used to belong to the Mountain Devil Mafia. It would seem that they've been integrated among the tribe of the Confederacy. Either way though, this felt like a really good time to try out some of those serums that we had purchased, giving Shinichi a metal blood serum. This, accompanied with the coffee that he had drank before the battle, meant that not only would he be very durable, but he would also be pretty fast and be able to catch up with the Confederacy members. An ample opportunity to use his chainsaw. Didn't even know what hit him. He began chasing down the last remaining members, even taking a few shots here and there from them. That metal blood serum really does seem to work, as it made him almost completely impervious to damage, matched alongside with his sophisticated armor. But in the end, I'm afraid they did end up escaping our grasp just by a hair. We almost had them. There's always next time, but as for right now, we did manage to keep one of them alive long enough for us to take her prisoner. And maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but I think she should be grateful because she could have turned out like all of her comrades. I always find it quite interesting to see all of the different apparel styles throughout the many tribes that make up the Confederacy of Banyam. Much easier to get a good view at their different apparel styles when they're all lying on the ground dead, or burning alive. The prisoner that we took was named Fithel, and I feel like that's a very familiar name. Perhaps we've encountered someone with that same name in Season 1. Either way, these are her stats. She has a burning passion in shooting as well as cooking, and she's also pretty decent at plants, which is going to come in handy for sure. Besides, we would need someone to take Rulant's place after we banished him to a labor camp at the Citadel anyway. In the meantime, we would begin making a little bit of a cleanup effort here, trying to get rid of all the bodies as well as all the blood and everything laying out around our defenses as the Constructoids and some of our mercenaries began repairing our defenses. However, this was rudely interrupted when our slave Machu decided to rebel against us. Our enslaved peoples here normally go out and cut down cacti, that way we can use the wood for chem fuel, and this normally means that they automatically equip axes, which actually give them a little bit too much courage, resulting in rebellions and sometimes death, unfortunately, as well. As you can see with Machu, it would appear that Kirkos shot him right through the torso, turning it into a fine mist. Well, it would appear that we now have two of our enslaved workers that we need to replace. Because Machu decided to rebel and go out in a very dishonorable way, we're not going to be giving him an honorable burial. No, we're going to be chucking grenades onto his carcass until it is completely gone. This may seem a bit taboo and a bit awful and cruel, but, let it be an example to the others that we still have, perhaps. We run a tight ship around these parts. Now, with the flames of rebellion against us squashed and extinguished, I thought it was time that we begin working on some more car parts so that we can build more vehicles. Last season, we had a lot of vehicles, and I feel like this season we've hardly had any, even though it is just episode 2. I mean, we still are warlords after all. It seems like it would be fitting for us to have some damn vehicles to extend our power, if you will. Like crush any of our enemies abroad if we need to, or run them over and turn them into hood ornaments, and that is why we have built yet another highwayman. We would then, a little bit of time later, end up having a slaver come from the Outlands to the base, and yes, as you could imagine, they are indeed here to sell us people, and we were looking to buy since we're currently a little bit low on mercenaries and or workers. I am a bit more interested in purchasing slaves that will join us as colonists instead of actual slaves, that way we can use them during combat situations. Upon further inspection though, it would appear that this slave caravan was run by the Forgotten, and their leader, Ortega. I felt that that was important to mention because the slaves that they have appear to be rebel and martial soldiers who have, well, been captured. Now at first, because of this, I thought, well, maybe we shouldn't buy them, but then I realized that all three of them would join us as colonists instead of slaves, and I was quite tempted, especially because relations are already sinking with both factions. Besides, surely to God they wouldn't be stupid enough to declare war on us over 3 of their soldiers being enslaved and joining us. That would most definitely not be in their best interest, or ours of course. We would immediately send them all 3 in the armory to equip some of the armor so that they're at least matching with our other mercenaries, as well as equipping some weapons so that they could defend themselves as well as their new home. Now with these 3 being soldiers in the 2 factions, I would have expected them all to be quite adept at fighting, except BB here is actually incapable of violence, which makes me think she probably had some type of non-combat role. But either way, here are their stats. First up we have Kate, who is very good at melee and pretty good at social, and is also very pretty, and that's really about it in terms of positives. Next up we have BB, who as mentioned a moment ago is incapable of violence, but does excel with a burning passion in plants, artistic, and intellectual. Really the only good stat here is her intellectual skill, so she may very well be helping out Downs in her lab. She's also psychically sensitive, a body modder with a chemical fascination. Last but not least is Evans, with very little passion for many types of work, but he's pretty good at construction, planting, and artistic. He's also an iron-willed, abrasive sanguine, which is absolutely perfect, as the desert can be quite stressing on the mind. Finally, we are once again increasing our number of mercenaries at the headquarters. It's nice to finally be growing once more. I can only hope that our purchasing of the soldiers, though, into our ranks doesn't cause any really ill will or bad blood with the marshals and the rebels. Uh-oh. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, Season 2, as it were. Today, my friends, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Now, I say that a lot, and we normally do, of course, but this time it rings true more than any other, given that the 2 largest factions on the planet are hostile with us now. One of the first projects we're completing today is via Downs, and it is in the form of research into complex electronics. Not exactly what you were probably expecting, given the fact that we're now in some sort of Cold War. However, this declaration by the Marshal Service and the rebels has everyone feeling a little bit tense, and I think some R&R is in order, some proper R&R in our recreation room. So we're going to be using our new research to create some new types of recreational items, such as a flat screen TV for everyone to enjoy in something of a movie theater. Interestingly enough, as we were putting the finishing touches on this new section to the recreation room, we actually had an armorer from one of our outposts contact us. Essentially, the long and short of it, he was going to make some specialized armor for us, but he was seeking some funding from the company, so we actually sent him 2,000 silver to complete his little project. Speaking of completing projects though, now our recreation room is finally completed. Now you may have noticed that I had already removed our brainwashing room as well to make room for our little movie theater, so we need a new one. But this time around, I would actually build several of these rooms. That way we can brainwash several people at the same time, opposed to how we were previously just doing one at a time. Now, I haven't exactly looked into this all that deep, but I have noticed it seems like the Uncle Boris's brainwashing chair mod doesn't have an option anymore to reduce the resistance of a pawn, only their will, making it easy to enslave them, but not making it easy to recruit them, which was previously a feature before the 1.5 update when Anomaly dropped as well. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I know Anomaly added a way so that you can reduce the resistance of a pawn just like you used to be able to do with the mod, so maybe that's it, but let me know what you guys think. Now with the more minute task completed, we can focus on the more important things, such as the fact that our nuclear bomb storage room has been empty for far too long. Given the fact that things seem to be escalating quite a bit with the rebels and the marshals, we need some mutually assured destruction, if you know what I mean. And we now have 3 three small pieces to that much larger puzzle. It's important to keep in mind that we could react quite quickly to an attack or a nuclear threat by using our artillery cannons in the front of the base, as they can target a Marshal settlement not far away as well as a rebel one, giving us enough time to mobilize a ground invasion as well. However, our resource well is running quite dry at the moment, meaning that we can only create those 3 small nuclear warheads. That's not exactly enough to deter any of these larger factions. We'll need to think of something a little bit more clever if we hope to keep ourselves from becoming nuclear ash in a large mushroom cloud. And I think I might just have an idea. But before we could act on our little plan, it would seem the armorer that was requesting funding earlier has made good on his promise. Not only has he made some advanced recon armor, never to be seen on this planet before outside of the high-tech Marshal technology, but he has also given it to us. And we have decided to give it to Shinichi, as he is the commander and or general of our mercenaries. Although that color sticks out like a sore thumb, so we would need to dye it a more grayish green color to kind of fit in with the surroundings just a little bit better. We would leave the gold trim, however, because if they're close enough to see that on his armor, they're already dead. Now then, on to our grand plan. One of our outposts nearby had detected a rebel mining site hidden away between the mountains. Now, not only were we going there, but we were also going to attack them. Now, you may say, Rat Knight, if you're worried about escalating tensions and hostility, why would you attack them outright? Well, 1, we desperately need some steel, and 2, the rebels have more of a sense of morality compared to the Marshals, so if we were maybe to, I don't know, kidnap some of their civilians who are mining or their soldiers, they might not nuke us. As our forces were making the journey over to the mining site though, I remembered that last episode we had Pig 1 here, and Pig 1 is now starving to death because it is winter time. Just wanted to give you an update on that. We're also going to begin researching heavy turrets, which is part of Bean's Turret Pack, a new mod for Season 2 here, giving us access to a heavy turret as well as a missile launcher turret. These should make for some great additions to reinforcing our defenses. Now, we've basically sent all of our mercenaries away from the base to attack this mining site, so I have decided to leave Scott here with Downs to keep her protected, as well as all of her mechanoids. Between the old man's eagle eyes and his sniper rifle, along with all of our robotic companions here, she should be safe and sound, as should the base as well. Sometime later though, and our mercenaries had finally arrived at the mining site. Let Operation Valley Assault begin. The work site was probably of mediocre size, but was indeed chock full of civilian miners. There were also a few familiar faces among them. Don't get it twisted though, just because the majority of the forces here were civilians doesn't mean it wasn't well protected. They were even hiding a uranium slug turret under some scrap metal and chunks. Not to mention all the soldiers crawling about, of course. Thanks to the tall valley walls, our mercenaries were able to sneak in quite silently and begin taking a few pot shots at the miners. We were focusing our efforts on taking down that uranium slug turret, trying to draw its fire with our highwaymen. Since one of those large slugs to the chest could be detrimental to our health, we decided to try and pull our troops back. We would eventually be able to take down their automated defenses, leaving nothing but their soldiers and their miners to fend for themselves. Fending for themselves would be much harder than it sounds though, as there was hardly anything they could do against our highwaymen, running them up against the side of the mountain and crushing their bones. Truly a tragic, shameful, and disgusting way to go out of this world. Oh well. With the majority of their troops dead, I was beginning to think we wouldn't have any hostages to take until we took down this handsome purple fella, but we ended up killing his compadre, unfortunately. Well, my unlucky friend, it would seem that you are going to be our one and only hostage, at least for the time being. Now, let's see if we can tend to those wounds with a little bit of dirt and some, I don't know, rocks maybe? We may not have gotten that many hostages to take back home, but we did get plenty of weapons, thromboid hammers and axes, and assault rifles, knives, you name it, they basically had it here, and now it's ours, which is pretty sweet. Most importantly of all though, were those sweet, succulent stacks of steel for us to take back home and use on any of our new projects, such as weapon production, or maybe a new vehicle, I guess we'll see. Speaking of vehicles, we would begin repairing ours, as well as loading all of that wonderful steel into both of them, that way we can haul it back home. However, we had received notification that militias were coming from the Blue Rock settlements to attack one of ours. In case you forgot, the Blue Rock settlements are under rebel control. Perhaps some type of retaliation effort after finding out that we destroyed their mining camp. Either way, we would set a pretty good sized defending force. A couple of days later, as we were returning back to base, the RimWorld Marshal Service began attacking yet another of our settlements. It would seem this war is finally becoming interesting. Because of all the recent attacks, I began working on a new squad loadout. This new soldier class is going to be a K9 unit. They will have a pretty standard armor set for our mercenaries, but they're also going to be equipped with a Hellcat rifle and a Husky. I would then expend a good bit of our treasury on upgrading those settlements that are nearest to our headquarters, with them being in such close proximity to our enemies. It was around about this time that our caravan had finally returned home, not only with our resources, but with our hostage, but most importantly with our resources. Plenty of steel, of course. As we began working on hauling all that back inside, we would also put our hostage in his prison cell for the time being. Once that was completed, it was time for us to drop off all the weapons that we had acquired. Speaking of which, by this point, our armory was filled to the brim with weapons and armor. Weapons and armor, of course, that we plan on taking to the Outlands and distributing among the locals for some silver, of course, as well as our good compadres, the Forgotten. The intelligence we've received from our bases in the Outlands has been telling us that the Forgotten are having some issues, you could say, with their armor. Essentially, the rebels and the marshals are working together in some joint operations to try and clear out the Forgotten, and they're getting popped like water balloons. So wrapping their heads in some bulletproof brain buckets might be just what the doctor ordered. However, unfortunately, on our way back home, we received notification that our defense had failed and the rebels had completely sacked one of our nearby bases. Those bastards. However, on the bright side, we shouldn't have any issue repairing any of the buildings or completely reconstructing any of the amenities that were in that settlement, as we have a shit ton of silver from the Outlands. Given the circumstances, with everything beginning to really heat up, I thought it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and increase our defenses as well as improve upon the defenses that we currently have, such as adding some of the brand new types of turrets that we've researched, and also converting this old ancient danger that was next to our pillbox into a larger pillbox itself. The next morning, though, during constructing, we could hear gunshots in the distance. There was an absolute bloodbath taking place just on the outskirts of our territory. It would seem leader of the Forgotten, Ortega, was leading a few of his men in a battle against what appears to be the RimWorld Marshal Service. My best guess, they were coming here to trade and were completely ambushed. Even with the new weapons and armor that we had provided to them, they were heavily struggling against the Marshal's androids. Now, granted, these androids could literally tank a doomsday rocket launcher shot, so can you blame them? Badly injured, the Forgotten would begin trying to make a retreat out of the territory, while those who could still leave, as the others were crawling in a pool of their own blood, even poor Ortega. Broken and beaten, squirming on the ground. Could this be it? Lucky for him, the cavalry had just arrived. Yes indeed, my friends, fear ye not, for the SNR Rifle Company has come to the rescue once again. Save your applause for after the show. During our rescue of Ortega, we get to partake in one of our favorite pastimes, running over people, and this time around we'd also get to run over some androids, which was also pretty cool, though eventually the bastards would cause the highwaymen to stall out, meaning that this operation would have to be continued on foot. Using our chainsaw, we would dismantle that bastard. Perhaps we should call it the Can Crusher. Well, not only were we victorious in the battle, but it would also seem that we were the saving grace and or guardian angels of our customers here. I'm gonna level with you, we wouldn't have really minded just leaving them out there to die, but the problem is, if we do that, who's going to buy all of our guns nowadays? No, we just couldn't allow it, even if keeping them here until they're healed up puts an even larger target on our backs. But with that little kerfuffle finally out of the way, we could once again begin prioritizing our attention to our defenses. Interestingly enough, though, into the night, we would end up having a shaman merchant come from the Outlands. No doubt they have all sorts of hippy-dippy serums and doodads of some sort that they're wanting to sell to us, and we would actually end up buying some of those. They were quite persuasive and ended up talking us into buying some of this bioferrite. Perhaps we could make some type of melee weapons out of this material. We had also purchased a book along with some whiskey, but most importantly, we had also purchased a Psychic Insanity Lance, an ancient artifact of a weapon from a time long since past. We do have a particular target in mind for this weapon, but that's for me to know. A bit of time later, we had finally recruited Fithel into our ranks. I believe she was a Thromboian tribesperson from the Confederacy of Banya from last episode, but all I know now is she's our friend. And so we've decided to equip her with the best weapons and armor that, well, we haven't sold yet, and put her ass right to work in the kitchen. Not because she's a lady, but because she's good at cooking. Thank you. By this point, we had also finally finished up our heavy turrets, as well as another double autocannon, which would indeed exponentially improve our defenses. Last but not least though, in our refurbished and repurposed new peel box, we've also built 2 large missile launcher turrets for that explosive damage, mama. We also built 2 steel barriers behind them just to give some extra cover to our mercenaries, as well as some sandbags outside. And just like that, our defensive upgrades, at least those on the outside, are finally completed. Perfect timing as well. Any raid right now in this thick snow will have a hard time getting away from our turrets. I wanted to make some upgrades on the inside of the base as well. We are making sure that we're well defended, but you know, our mercenaries aren't exactly the nicest bunch of people, so we have to make sure that we're keeping them happy to avoid an insider threat. You may also notice that during this, I'm deconstructing quite a few things like tables and chairs that I wouldn't exactly have to normally. The reason for that is because those were placed before the game was updated to 1.5, and they're a little glitched out. Regardless of that though, we would eventually get the new kitchen finished, and we even managed to place some nice wine racks so that we can keep our whiskeys and beers. But with that, the kitchen is now much nicer. Hopefully everyone shall enjoy it, and hopefully this will help quell any ambitious ideas. But if you thought I was done improving this base, you are, well, almost correct. The only thing I done after that was add some ceiling turrets, specifically 4 of them, to our nuclear storage room. Just because, well, we keep nuclear bombs in here. I also wanted to mention that our purple hostage with the funny name was doing A-OK, and I had also alerted the rebels to let them know that he's here, that way they don't drop any nukes on us. Funny though, they haven't responded yet. Well, somebody who did respond well to their medical treatment was Ortega and his friend Dirk here, who were leaving the territory after being completely healed. Leaving without saying goodbye, I might add, but whatever, as long as they buy some more guns. Later on that night, our taxes arrived from many of our settlements, and we actually planned on spending this silver on settling a few new settlements that were near the headquarters. You might be asking yourself why I keep doing this, and other than just expanding the company and the gun empire further, there's also a feature that allows you to call reinforcements from settlements, so I thought it might be useful and more realistic if they were closer by. After founding these 2 new settlements, we would also go through and do many upgrades for them. Most importantly, of course, was an ammunition mine, that way we can begin making some weapons. But I also noticed that many of our settlements near the headquarters were in close proximity to rebel and martial cities, and I thought it might be quite useful and convenient to have a few artillery outposts in these areas in case shit were to hit the fan anytime soon. As we were upgrading bases on the world map, we were also building some advanced solar panels back at the base, just to ensure that our power output is as effective as possible. However, this would be interrupted by a raid. Well, it would seem the rebels have finally come to try to rescue their hostage. Now, I do realize this is quite a small group of attackers, but I can guarantee you what they lack in size, they make up for in firepower, but also in experience, with their leader here being one of the more prominent members of the United Rebel Forces. And the reason I say all this is because we would be absolute fools to underestimate this raiding party. As you can see, they've even brought a high-tech android and or mechanoid into the battle as well, something we didn't even know that they had. We'll need to put a heavy focus on overloading its shields during the battle, as it intercepts ground projectiles, protecting everyone within its shield as well. We had hoped that they would ride in on their vehicles, but as mentioned, these rebels appear to be quite knowledgeable, as riding in between the valley to get to the base in these would be a death sentence. Speaking of which, they were nestled into the valley walls quite well, so firing our mortars unfortunately would have very little effect. Our mercenaries would rush to their battle stations as the rebel forces began to advance against our headquarters. As mentioned, we were going to focus our efforts on their mechanoid and its shield. Using our automated turrets to burst the shield seemed to work out in the beginning here. This way none of its companions could hide behind it. But even without its shield, the rebels and the android would continue pushing on, destroying many of our defenses very quickly. Though in doing so, the rebels had set a trap for themselves. It was hard for them to see through all the smoke and the flames, giving us an ample opportunity to gun them down. Once the chaos began to clear a bit and they realized what was happening to their numbers, they would begin to try and flee. We had already had Richard circling around to try and take Carol down so she wouldn't escape. We preferred to capture her, so hopefully she doesn't bleed out on the battlefield as we're waiting for her robots and the others to clear out a little bit before we make our move. Don't get me wrong, they would make a valiant effort to try and recover any of their companions that were still lying out there injured. It was just that they couldn't stop our overwhelming forces that had now taken over the battlefield completely. Realistically, it was the best decision they could have made, as anything else would have been a death sentence. Speaking of which, other than Carol, there were a couple of other rebels lying out on the ground wishing to die, but of course we wouldn't allow that to happen as we needed more hostages. Not everyone would be as lucky as these few rebel soldiers though. Sorry, lady, too many mouths to feed. As you can see, like I mentioned earlier, they pack one hell of a punch and they had already done one hell of a number on our defenses. If we got paid in silver every time we had to rebuild one of these turrets, well, I would be tickled pink to be honest with you, because we expend a lot of our silver having to replace them. Resources are expendable though, people are not, and I'm glad that no one died during this battle and that we can continue to ensure our safety by keeping these hostages in our prison. Hopefully now the rebels will have some understanding of how powerful our upgraded defenses truly are. I also realized that the leader of the rebel attackers, Carol here, is 94 years old. My god, these rebels are built different. We had to dump an entire magazine into her to get her to drop. Well, now that we've taken care of the attackers themselves, we would have to figure out what we were going to do with their vehicles. I wish there were a way for us to claim these for ourselves, as I think they'd make a great addition to our vehicle repertoire. But I'm afraid that is just not a possibility, so instead we would have to settle for gunning them down and destroying them. Now, the best thing about this is we got a little bit of scrap metal, which wasn't all that important, but importantly, we did end up getting some vehicle parts, so that was pretty good. We would also receive some intelligence and notification that the RimWorld Marshal Service was about to attack another of our settlements, so of course we would end up setting a defending force, and while we were waiting on the outcome of that battle, we would take our time and begin deconstructing many of the mechanoids that the rebels had brought along with them for some different things like steel. You could basically call this recycling, turning these war bots back into guns and shields and armor, just as God intended. We would also begin adding a new layer to our defenses with a steel high security fence just outside of our turrets. Now, this added layer of defense is somewhat trivial for the most part, I suppose, but the most important thing about it is that you can only shoot through the gates, as the actual fence itself has a very high cover effectiveness, so much so that you can't shoot over it or through it. Essentially meaning that if the shit hits the fan, we can run behind this new security fence. And it's also important because I feel like the attackers, once they overwhelm our turrets, and that's sure to happen again, even with our upgraded turrets, they come straight through this area, so hopefully the fence can try to delay the inevitable, if you will. Now, by this point, within the walls of the base, as well as all over our territory here on the map, we have accumulated a very large pile of steel slag chunks and/or scrap metal chunks. Now, though the process of this is going to be quite tedious and take a very long time and also be quite time consuming and take away from things like weapon creation and whatnot, I have decided to build an electric smelter. That way we can begin smelting these chunks into proper steel that we can use. Because it hardly matters if it's taking time away from producing weapons if we don't have enough steel to actually use. A bit of time later and we were informed that our defense of our settlement against the RimWorld Marshal Service had failed and they had destroyed 2 of our buildings. Very well, since these bastards are taking the gloves off with us and attacking our settlements, maybe we should take the gloves off as well and prepare for a retaliatory strike. Not to worry, I don't plan on using any nukes, but at the bomb crafting station we made some little surprises for them. It's time that they found out the lengths that we'll go to protect our own. Ah, Ah, there we are, just a little something for their troubles. 2 little gifts from the SNR Rifle Company, carefully wrapped in smoldering ash. It would seem that we also achieved a corpse for our efforts, and also some pretty minor damage to the surrounding buildings, albeit better than nothing, I suppose. Well, with our swift retribution delivered to those fools, we can now focus on some projects back at the headquarters. First and foremost, I'm going to be building some sterile tiles in our operating room. This will make the room much cleaner and, of course, make our chance of getting a proper operation done as well as tending wounds much better. Since we have so many sandstone blocks and limestone blocks, I also want to go through each individual room that doesn't have a proper floor and only has a smooth floor and replace them with some proper tile. Not only that, but I would also utilize a lot of this stone to build some proper plant pots and things of that sort that we should have had a long time ago, really. We're probably the 3rd most powerful and the 3rd richest faction on the entire planet, so it's about time we started acting like it. I also wanted to go ahead and name our vehicles, as I did ask you guys for some names last episode, and of course you happily provided. So first up, we have our truck that we're going to be naming Shinichi's Revival. Something of an homage to our old truck, Shinichi's Pride, of course, and this is a great name from our friend Lisa Skinner-X1Y, so thank you very much. Moving on though, we would also be naming our highwayman the Rattlesnake, which is in line with our theme of desert predators, I suppose you could say, as our last one was named the Sand Viper. I didn't want the paint job on this one to be identical to the last one, the Sand Vipers, so it is slightly different, just using the same color scheme, of course. But of course, credit where credit is due, the wonderful name, the Rattlesnake, is from our compadre, Murderer of Seahorses. An interesting name, my friend. And a big thank you to everyone who provided a name suggestion. Keep in mind that I very well may use your suggestion in the future, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, we are going to be building a new path next to the base here, as well as a helipad. As we were in the process of construction, I did notice that some of our loyal soldiers were passing by for one of our nearby settlements. Now, of course, it's not all that uncommon to see our mercenaries out and about, but I did find this of particular interest because they had a husky with them, just like the canine unit that we had made previously. Anyhow though, after trying out a few different iterations, I finally found a combination of slate blocks and concrete that I liked for our new helipad, and we would go ahead and build a new Mosquito helicopter on it. And now with that, not only do we have a new teeny tiny helicopter to move any goods back and forth or perform any rescue missions perhaps, but we also now have an appropriate path to get to our defensive line. But wait a minute, you did hear me say that we might be performing a rescue mission, didn't you? Well, you did not mishear me, I can tell you that much. After performing a swift little pickup, we now have one of our forgotten members of our team. Ah, Pig 1. Welcome home, old pal that none of us have met yet, except for Scott that one time when he purchased you and left you in the desert. Well, we would also go ahead and give the pig a name. We will be naming this handsome young lad Wilbur. But this splendid name comes from our splendid friend Tyrone 1773, who was saying that if we rescue the pig, we should call him Wilbur from Charlotte's Web. Well, my friend, not only did you inspire the name, but you also inspired me to go and rescue the pig, because without you, I probably would have let it starve to death, to be honest with you. Shortly thereafter, I realized that today is actually a holiday. For those of you that watched season 1 of this series, it is the Banyayan invasion. For those of you that did not watch season 1, this is a holiday that we created after defeating the largest raid ever that was actually from the Confederacy of Banya, as you might have guessed. Throughout the day, there was a bit of a somber tone as everyone was working due to the serious events of the holiday. However, by that evening, we were all having celebratory drinks. We were even hanging out in our recreation room playing some poker, some pool, and even some arcade machines as well. Scott and Richard were hanging out around the garage next to the Rattlesnake and smoking a couple of cigars together, just shooting the shit. Holidays like these, and just times like these in general, we find that it's best to kick back and just sort of admire the empire that they've built. Because truly, we're not only celebrating the holiday today, we're also celebrating our great successes throughout this episode, such as capturing hostages, successful operations against the rebels, and defenses against them as well. Truthfully, things were great. and they were finally going our way. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series. Today, my friends, we have a lot of work to do. The first thing we're going to be doing is trying to stop Commando Jr. from burning the whole damn place down, since he's on a pyromaniac fire-starting spree. We're also going to be hunting the wildlife in our courtyard to clear them out, and that way we have some fine desert donkey meat to feed to our rebel hostages. As you might imagine, if they were to starve to death on us, we wouldn't have any leverage anymore. Speaking of which, our animals, Mistake and Wilbur the pig, were beginning to starve to death on occasion, so I ended up building some haylofts in our stable for them. This way they should have a steady supply of food nearby at all times. Now on to more pressing matters. You guys have brought this up, and I have noticed it myself as well, that our battery room in the front of the HQ here is a little bit of a security concern with the very thin wall. So not only have I decided to expand the battery room just a little bit, but I have also added a reinforced armored wall on the outside. Theoretically, this should make it much harder for any unwanted visitors to enter the base through here, and of course now the battery room won't be such a liability, but it's still kind of a liability, so I've decided to build a backup battery room in our escape tunnel just a little bit north of the treasury. This way, if we were to be attacked and our battery room up front were to be wiped out, the backup power should kick in and keep the lights as well as our turrets on. Now all that digging sure did give us a decent little stockpile of coal. Now there weren't thousands upon thousands of pieces, but it was enough that we could make a little bit of money off of it, so we decided to load it up into the eye and begin flying it towards the outlands. Now at this point, basically every single faction uses fossil fuels for something, but we hadn't traded with the Thromboian Union in quite a while, so I decided to sell it to them to keep relations good. After Scott returned, it would seem that we made just over 1,700 pieces of silver. Not too shabby if I do say so myself. After that, we would once again begin focusing on putting some more effort and beauty into the rooms of our mercenaries. Simply, of course, to ensure that they are all quite happy with their accommodations. All we really did was use a lot of the cloth that we've been growing to put some nice rugs in everyone's rooms. But it really increases the beauty stat significantly. After that, I began taking a look at Greffus once more. As many of you may remember from Season 1, we performed about 4 or 5 surgeries and gave Greffus all of her prosthetic limbs, which truly was a miracle because she was basically just a head on a torso at one point. However, this still has limited her mobility as well as manipulation, so we decided to have Richard here whip her up a little bit of a surprise. This, my dear friends, is an industrial exoframe. Admittedly, it is still an experimental technology, but it is based on the hydraulic systems of our mechs. Not only would it increase her carrying capacity as well as her speed, but it would also give her a better aim when shooting weapons, as well as basically anything she would be doing with her hands that requires some type of dexterity. Oh, also Greffus is a boy. My bad. I'm a warlord, for God's sake, not a doctor. Anyhow though, as Greffus is getting used to his new exosuit, we are going to be preparing for something of a military operation. Nothing serious, more of a training exercise or a drill. Put simply, we're just checking out the drop pod systems of nearby settlements of ours, as well as the response times of said drop pods. Because God forbid if something were to happen, especially given the political climate, you could say, if we were to need some reinforcements and they weren't available. We would end up performing some pretty basic movement drills with the squad and just had them run around the courtyard essentially, up until the point that we were pleased, and then we had them go on their merry little way all the way back home. All of our forces right now are on high alert. Hopefully we never have to call in reinforcements to the headquarters, but it is definitely a possibility. Now then, while still on the topic of our settlements and bases around the world, we're going to begin building some trading posts at our larger ones. This should assist them with selling more weapons and ammunition for the Empire, and thus bringing in more silver. Silver that we can reinvest back into their communities, making their lives even better. Speaking of infrastructure though, we're going to be building building a nice little path underneath our two brand new anti-aircraft guns. I'm sure you guys remember we did have some of these previously, but I think we lost them during a raid. Nowadays, the sky is one of the most dangerous places to be, but of course these guns aren't going to do us any good if we can't detect any incoming aircraft, so we would end up building a radar upgrade into Down's lab. However, though their specialty is on aircraft, they can also be used on ground targets as well. Perhaps we should have a little bit of a demonstration. I've ended up building some cloth decoy targets here so that I could show you just how powerful they are. Needless to say, those are pretty darn good. Perhaps if enemies somehow make it past our security fence and other defenses, we could fall back to here. A few hours later, however, I began hearing gunshots in the distance. Come to find out, two small traveling groups between the Thromboian Union and Confederacy of Banya were fighting. And I'll be honest with you, I never get tired of seeing our clients put our handiwork like that shotgun and that rifle there into action. As I'm sure you could imagine, the Thromboian Union had no problem stomping the absolute shit out of them with the weapons that we'd given them. And as always, those who do business with us come out on top, and their enemies go 6 feet in the ground. Ah, to imagine how traumatizing it must be to see the lifeless corpse of your comrade eaten by an iguana after a battle. You poor little goober. Speaking of eating, we would end up chopping up and eating one of their holy thrombos that fell in battle. Just don't tell the Union, though. As the Union tribespeople were trying to heal up from their wounds and what appeared to be take a little nap, we would snake in and try to take as many weapons as we could. We would then begin spending plenty of silver, as I discussed earlier, by upgrading many of our little towns and rebuilding some of the structures that have been destroyed throughout some different raids. Back home, Downs was working in her laboratory, but we began hearing a banging down towards the prison cells. Turns out one of the rebels was getting a wild hair and wasn't looking to stay here anymore. We brought in Shinichi and 2 of our other mercenaries along with our mechs in case he needed a bullet or 2 to be put down. Although I was thinking beating him on the head with these shields a few times would do the trick, and turns out I was right. Come on, big fella, surely it's not that bad. I mean, technically, we don't have to feed you all the time. I thought making and forcing them to wear these orange prison t-shirts might make them a little bit less rebellious since they didn't have their armor or anything on anymore, but turns out the rebels are indeed quite rebellious, as you might imagine. A bit of time later, we ended up having a bulk goods trader coming from the Outlands. Naturally, of course, they were looking to purchase some of our fine weaponry, but mostly all they really ended up buying were some artillery shells as well as some leathers we had in exchange for some components and advanced components. Because of our bases in the Outlands, we get these types of traders pretty often. They're also a good source of steel as well. A bit of time later, and Downs had finally finished up research into Vitals Monitor, which is going to allow us to build some technology that will be quite useful in our medical room. During this time, we did a complete overhaul of our medical room, which has been long overdue. We swapped out the flooring for sterile tiles, we made one large vital monitor so we can actually keep an eye on the vitals of everyone inside the room, as well as some IV bags, and we swapped out every single bed for some proper hospital beds. Not only making our medical care much faster, but also making it much more effective. We then began getting some strange reportings from one of our settlements in the Outlands. Apparently they've seen some strange figures wearing some strange outfits wandering into the forest at night, so we decided to investigate. I'm sure it's probably just some type of Thromboian tribal ritual or something. Besides, at the moment, we have much bigger fish to fry. One of the chieftains of the Thromboian Union has some intel for us. It would seem that there's a martial safe house not too far away from HQ, and they're storing one of their high-value soldiers there, known as the Phantom. A high-value soldier to them, but a high-value target to us as well as our allies. The Marshal Service may be a bunch of cruel monsters, but one thing they are not is stupid. Hiding a safe house in plain sight was genius. For this mission, we'll be sending out Kate and Nurzak, as their skill sets weren't in dire need around the headquarters at the moment, and the 2 of them are a pretty sneaky duo. Stealth is going to be quite crucial on this mission to ensure that our helicopter doesn't get blown out of the sky before we even end up arriving at their safe house. Flying there in the cover of night would give us exactly the stealth that we were looking for. We would arrive a couple of hours later, being sure to touch down near some small mountains just out of sight. Of course though, arriving here without being detected was merely a fraction of the mission. Even though we were trying to do this a bit quietly, we had brought some big guns in case things get out of hand. For now though, the two of them would begin scouting out the base. It was quite small as we had expected, but absolutely packed to the gills with Marshal Service soldiers. From our position in the hills, we could also see the Phantom step outside, with a very interesting and unique set of custom armor, no doubt awarded to him by their top brass for taking many a Thromboian life. Given the amount of enemies that are here, I don't think we'll be able to do this quietly like we had hoped for, nor do I think we'll only be able to do it with 2 soldiers. No, we're going to have to call in some reinforcements. We called in backup from many of our local settlements. The vast majority of our forces would consist of our brand new K9 units. Best of all, it would seem that we've caught them completely off guard. No doubt they weren't expecting a bunch of mercenaries to fall from the sky. I can say for a fact that the Phantom was definitely caught off guard. Target neutralized. Our mercenaries were truly giving them hell, hiding in the shadows, only making themselves visible by the muzzle flash of their Hellcat rifles. The marshals and the rebels have underestimated us for far too long. Let this be a lesson to them that we can muster up forces to rival their own. This would be an ample time for Nurzak and Kate to move in to try and assist our allies. Up until this point, HQ had them stay back, mostly because they're not as expendable. It would seem, however, after hours of chaotic battle, we have came out victorious. And even though the Phantom's body was completely destroyed during the battle, it would seem the Thromboian Union has still held up their end of the bargain, thankfully. Normally, I would say that it's kind of them to take our word for it, but when the safe house looks like this, there wasn't really any denying that we took out the target. Our payment for completing this little mission was a Psi-Link neuroformer, a piece of ancient Thrombo tech that is said to give the user some type of psychic abilities. I suppose we'll be the judge of that. With a successful mission under our belt though, it was time to bring Nurzak and Kate back home. Our brave mercenaries ended up arriving back home later on that night, no doubt needing a little bit of well-earned R&R after a successful mission. A bit of time later, our mercenary contact in the Outlands reported back what they had saw about the people going into the woods at night. Apparently this group of people were performing some type of carnal ritualistic acts. I didn't want to shut it down without further information about who these people were, so we decided to continue to investigate. The very next night, our contact reported back that these same rituals were taking place once more. However, this time they brought out some type of ornate chest with religious symbolism on it. He was detected by the group but managed to get away from them before they could confront him. We would end up having to request that he go back once more so we can truly get to the bottom of what's going on. We are technically the only law in the Outlands, and I'm not looking to stomp on anyone's religious freedoms. In the meantime, while we patiently await his findings and his report on the cult-like activities in the Outlands, we would be attempting to tame plenty of boomalope. This is something you guys have recommended I do a lot even since Season 1, which is a great idea so I don't have to refine my own fuel or purchase it, but I've never really cared up until this point, until recently that is. It is becoming a little bit of a hassle with everything going on. While some of our mercenaries were out taming boomalope, 2 of them, Fithel and Commando Jr., were falling in love. Now, you may notice that this appears to be a proposal, so they're actually fiancés now, and that's most likely because they've been dating for quite some time in secret, or because I missed that when it happened. Sorry. Richard here had also completed 2 bionic legs. Now the reason that we've ended up creating these, as you might have guessed, is actually for Greffus. Slowly but surely, Greffus is really becoming quite the super soldier. Replacing all of his prosthetic limbs with bionics is a big goal of ours, as well of course as giving him that exosuit technology. However, we are still currently limited by our technology technology and understanding of basic bionics, so all the bionics in the world that we can currently create or find won't fix that mangled scar in his brain. We'll have to figure something out for that. We would also need to figure out what we're going to do with our supply of bioferrite, a material with some very unique properties. For now, I think we'll craft some melee weapons out of it, and maybe perhaps some shields as well. We'll have to experiment with it a little bit and see what does best. Later on into the night, we ended up having some beggars that stopped by, requesting something we didn't care enough to actually check. I didn't think any of them would make good mercenaries either, so I didn't even bother arresting them. I just thought I'll just let them do whatever they're doing, go about their merry little day sitting outside of our gates. But then something strange happened. They quickly brandished weapons and began firing upon Evans, who had to make a quick retreat if he hoped to survive, which he was able to do, thankfully. I give credit to his riot shield for that one. I was a bit confused, to say the least, until I realized. Trying to sneak into our base as a bunch of poor beggars. Ha! You idiots, we don't even care about those in need. Quite the blunder in their little plan, I would say. We would all begin rushing to our battle stations and to our vehicles to try and take these bastards down. This would be the perfect, ample opportunity to ensure that we welded the bumper onto the front of the rattlesnake good enough, and if you believe it or not, we really did. Our bumper would turn many of the Oak Foundation members into a fine red mist. Upon inspecting the body of the leader of this sorry outfit, I noticed something interesting. It would seem that she had a satchel charge on her. Think of it kind of like a special kind of C4 that is perfect for blowing open prison doors and rescuing all your filthy rebel comrades. Well, it's a damn good thing we stopped them before they made any real headway inside the base. If Evans would have been killed, then no one would have been able to alert us about what was going on, and they definitely would have made some significant progress. It's a good thing that he didn't die, I suppose. I mean, not only just because he couldn't have alerted us to them, you know, we don't want him to die. Either way, though, their plan was foiled, they're dead, and we're not. So it's time to take all their goodies, like those guns there, that way we can resell them. I also want to mention by this point we had already tamed 2 boomalope, though we will most definitely be getting quite a few more, so if you guys want to leave some names for boomalope, be sure to do so, and I'll check them out. I also made the decision to give our Psylink Neuroformer to Down. She does already kind of have some experience having ancient Thromboian tech inside of her brain, so, you know, I mean, might as well. So we ended up doing so, and after that, she ended up gaining the ability to throw rocks with her mind, which is pretty cool, I guess. Better than nothing. Unfortunately, though, we would end up getting some bad news. Our investigator/informant in the Outlands that was checking out these ritualistic sacrifices and whatever was going on there was found with his chest cavity split wide open. It would seem that we have some type of cannibal cult on the loose in the Outlands now. Well, no one ever said it would be easy running what's essentially the 3rd largest government on the planet. Given the circumstances, I decided to go through our bases in the Outlands and begin upgrading them with some barracks as well as in-house merc companies. Not only does this increase our military level in each of these that they're built in by 1, but it will also ensure that our citizens are safe and sound. Speaking of safety, it would appear that Ortega and his forgotten soldiers have come to buy some more weapons to protect themselves. Well, it's about damn time. We've been needing to do some trading, and we're always happy to see some familiar faces coming by, of course. Oh shit, a gigantic ambush led by General Hawthorne himself. Completely outmanned and outgunned, the Forgotten were caught off guard. There was basically nothing they could do. They had all died in a mere matter of moments, including Ortega himself. He was a valiant and honorable fighter, a veteran of the United Rebel Forces, but most importantly, damn it, he was our customer. He will be missed. No time to mourn then, though, I'm afraid, as the General's army is coming straight for the HQ. Hawthorne himself was leading the charge, far ahead of his men. Unfortunately for him, that's exactly what we were wanting. Even the mightiest of tigers can fall victim to a trap. Do you happen to remember our psychic insanity lance? I believe we got him, but he's still coming right for Scott. We're gonna have to try to get him the hell out of there as soon as possible. The Lance has turned his mind into scrambled eggs, meaning that he's going to try to bash anyone's head in that he comes across, even his own allies. But at the moment, he's still a bit fixated on Scott. I'm trying to get him away from him as soon as possible, slamming the door in Hawthorne's face. Hopefully this way he'll turn against his own. They had already turned against him, noticing that he's in a blind berserk rage, and so they started firing upon him. Eventually he would come out of the doorway, though he wasn't really attacking them back, at least for now it would seem. But either way, with Hawthorne taken out of the battle for the time being, we might actually stand a chance. Using our vehicles, we would attempt to draw the attention of the enemy soldiers, that way our people could come out on foot and get to the AA cannons. Now this sort of is our fault for letting them in through the gates, though they would have gotten in anyhow. I had opened up the garage gate, that way they could probably try to kill Hawthorne, but that never ended up happening, so now it's all on us. I would attempt to get many of our soldiers inside the base, or at least in the garage where they could take cover and fire at the enemies, because they were basically completely surrounding us. Many of our people were unconscious and or severely injured. Things were looking quite grim. Looks like we're going to have to call in some reinforcements. I would have requested the aid of our nearby settlements a bit earlier, except that mission from earlier at the safe house, I had to wait for the cooldown effect to go away, but now everyone was ready and dropping in at a moment's notice. And not a moment too soon at that. This would give us a much needed opportunity to begin tending to our wounds as our comrades fended off the marshals. They were even quite successful in their mission to take them down as well. At one point the marshals, what remained of them at least, decided to try and flee the area. But our brave mercenaries wouldn't let them get away so easily. The more of them that we slaughter now, the less of them we'll have to slaughter later. Sounds like a good deal to me. It is quite a shame we didn't have enough forces to stop all of the cowards from fleeing the area, but they'll get what's coming to them soon enough. Speaking of which, I did see Hawthorne wandering towards the edge of the map. He too would be leaving, though not with his soldiers. Thanks to our comrades who fell from the sky, we had managed to save Shinichi's life. If we hadn't rushed him into our medical bay and began tending to his wounds, he definitely would have bled out. As would have Gak and Commando Jr., who were in the Rattlesnake right before it blew up. If the enemies hadn't retreated when they did, they would have definitely bled out here on the ground before we could get to them as well. However, I am afraid that that does not mean this battle was without its losses. I'm afraid that poor Kirkos was gunned down in a firefight against the endless hordes of enemy soldiers. Just as well, our friend BB, being incapable of violence, had no way to stop the enemies from tearing her apart. Even our poor iguana Parthenax was killed during this invasion, though I couldn't find his body as it too was completely destroyed. A true injustice has been committed against us here today, but the SNR Rifle Company stands tall, bold and unwavering in the face of our enemies. Speaking of which, we had managed to take 2 of the martial soldiers hostage, although I'm going to maybe recruit them into mercenaries, I think, because the martial service doesn't have the same compassion, you could say, for their own troops. They'll still bomb the shit out of us. Now with the threat of the enemy assault finally over with, we could bury our dead, and just as well, we could finally begin our cleanup effort. Our courtyard was littered with the corpses of our allies, our enemies, steel chunks, weapons, and anything and everything in between, really. Ironically though, about a day or so after they completely failed to assault our base, the Marshal Service has requested that we meet with them for some peace talks. It would seem that our resolve and gumption has forced them into attempting to make peace with us. That and the fact that their secret weapon, General Hawthorne, is most likely wandering around the desert in an insane berserk state still. Though I must say, I don't know if I'm exactly interested in making peace with them. Let me know what you guys think. Should we make peace with the Marshal Service? We would still be at war with the rebels, and we would most likely not be trading any weapons to the Marshals still, since they're not at war with the rebels, but let me know what you think. Perhaps we should start stocking up in our nuclear arsenal once again and dropping all sorts of large nuclear warheads, blasting the entire planet back into the Stone Age. That might not be a good idea, though. Either way, though, before we go today, I want to show you that I am going to be naming the mosquito helicopter the Valkyrie. And this is an excellent name provided to us by our good friend Pre-Knife, who was saying that the Valkyrie is a great name for it since it is a rescue helicopter, and Valkyries were the saviors of dying soldiers. A pretty fitting name as well, since we have many soldiers that were on the brink of death just a few moments ago, but I digress. Until next time, friends. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, where at the moment, my friends, we are currently healing up as well as cleaning up from the massive assault by the Marshal Service at the end of last episode, where we experienced a lot of damage to our squishy human bodies, but also massive damage to our defenses as well, so we're working on repairing those. Meanwhile, though, something interesting was going on. We were so focused on repairing our defenses, we didn't even notice that there was a mass infestation just outside the base. They knocked Downs unconscious, and Scott and Richard would attempt to come to her aid. They had managed to kill the large keratin-encrusted beast, but we still had to take care of their nest. The eggs would hatch swiftly as soon as we approached, and the creatures began attacking us, but using our axe, our hammer, and the old chainsaw, we would manage to take them down. I then began having some issues. As you can see, we have a lot of notices here about military cooldown, literally almost 3,000. I believe that this issue may be caused by the save file being from the previous version of RimWorld. I don't really know. Either way, though, the only solution I could really find is to delete the settlement there in the Outlands, unfortunately, and then we would actually resettle it near the base. And I would actually even get some fine footage of our mercenaries during the rehoming process, moving to their new location to set up shop. Now, our days in the Outlands in terms of battles is basically over. We're just the governing force there, and many people, our people, live there nowadays. So realistically, moving a military installation settlement from the Outlands to near the headquarters here was inevitable anyhow. After our personnel got settled into the new settlement, though, as an homage to the old Iveta settlement in the Outlands, we decided to name this one New Iveta. Felt fitting enough to me. Now then, though, on to the peace talks with the RimWorld Marshal Service. At the end of last episode, I asked you guys to let me know what you thought about actually making peace with them, and based on these two top comments from the last episode, it would seem that you all want me to make peace with them, so that's what we'll be doing. For this mission, we'll be sending out Shinichi and Commando Jr. in the helicopter. Naturally, Shinichi being our general, it makes sense that he would be the mouthpiece of the SNR Rifle Company during these meetings, and Commando Jr. here is quite charismatic. Maybe he could talk them out of a tight spot if something goes awry. Besides, taking too many people could be seen as a threat against them. Not that I expect any trouble out of them. They know good and well that they are well within the range of our nuclear capabilities. We had arrived some odd hours later, and we would end up touching down just outside of the meeting spot. The place was absolutely crawling with soldiers, and no doubt there's plenty that we can't see right off the bat hiding in the sand dunes and small hills. Rightfully so, as the leader of the entire RimWorld Marshal Service, Commander Ross, was here himself for these peace talks. Well, color me flattered. We must be much more important than I had initially thought to them. We were quick to observe their defenses just in case the shit were to hit the fan. Every soldier here appeared to be of the specialist rank, meaning we would stand little to no chance if we took them on without any backup. They had also traveled here in large armored transport vehicles, meaning that anything lesser than a large nuclear warhead, like our smaller nuclear warheads, probably wouldn't do the job. Well, I suppose let's just hope and pray that Shinichi and his silver tongue can win them over. Here goes nothing. Well, it would seem that everything went to plan just as we had hoped for. Shinichi and Ross came to an understanding and peace has been made, with the two of them even sharing a laugh or two. Negotiations went so well, in fact, that they actually gifted us 5 Juggernaut serum that their scientist had perfected, the formula, of course, originally being from the Thromboian Union. Awful kind of them, really. I suppose they could give it to us now that we can't use it against their soldiers. Making peace with the Marshals is a massive step in the right direction, but remember, we're not going to be able to sell them plenty of weapons or ammo or anything like that until we get them going against the rebels once more. We're going to need to come up with a solution to get the two of them fighting. Also, you may notice the power going in and out, and that's because the Marshals had destroyed our advanced solar panels last episode, so we're going to have to fix those. But before that, I want to mention that we have finally recruited Cheeseman into our ranks. We're always more than happy to have well-trained and experienced soldiers joining our mercenaries. We sent his happy little ass straight into the armory to equip any weapons and armor that he might find useful. Now that we've made peace with the Marshals, we thought it might be a good idea to load up the Eye and send Scott out in it to do a little bit of trading with them. Now you might be asking yourself as to why, since we're not going to be able to sell them any of our weapons or ammo, and the reason is because we're actually going to be selling them plenty of herbal medicine in exchange for advanced components, just as well as some other resources like steel. The reason being, well, as I had mentioned earlier, we need to try and repair our advanced solar panels, and we would need these materials to do so, so we had Shinichi go ahead and start on that little project. And yes, we do have power coming back into our batteries now and into the base, but the problem is, ever since Season 1, we've had this same issue where we'll make these power generators and then a raid happens and we lose them. We need something inside the base that is safe and secure. Allow me to present to you the solution, Fueled ASRGs, which is an advanced radioisotopic power generator. Basically, we feed a couple of these bad boys some uranium and we're good to go. Of course, it's not quite that simple. First and foremost, we have to try and research the technology, which is going to take a little bit of time, so we'll check back in on that in a moment. Speaking of research, you may have noticed, as many did in the last episode, that the Outlands actually has a highway system that we initially researched actually a pretty good while ago. As mentioned, the save file is from the previous version of RimWorld. I think we've had this research for quite a while now. I don't remember if it was in Season 1. I want to say it was at the beginning of this season, but for whatever reason, the roads just never showed up. Until now, that is. Either way, though, a big thanks to Luke Mindell8197, who brought this up in the comments of last episode so that I could remember to mention it to you guys. Then a little bit of time later, and one of the chieftains of the Thromboian Union had made us an offer. They said that they had rescued 2 of their own from an enemy jail and they wanted us to guard them for 17 days. In exchange for doing so, they would give us some uranium, which we needed for our generators, a masterwork musical instrument, and a legendary weapon from previous wars. So, of course, we would be foolish not to accept. They had arrived sometime later, and we ended up vetting them to ensure that they truly are Union tribespeople. You can never be too careful these days. We checked out everything, down to the last freckle on their body, their accents, the weapons they carried, and anything and everything in between. Turns out they are good to go. And so we immediately put them to work doing some construction and some cooking projects for us. We don't take in freeloaders. By this point as well, our boomalope had made a smorgasbord of chem fuel for us to haul in and use for all our vehicles, and I want to say thank you because I didn't realize just how right you guys were when you were recommending getting them instead of purchasing it. This is much more passive and much easier. I also went ahead and named all the boomalope oil rig, we have octane, and then finally we have Ortega, and these are all suggestions that you guys provided, so thank you ever so much for those. I also ended up spotting some equipment just on the outskirts of our territory, some plasma ammo, a hooded tribal hood, grenades, a shield, all kinds of stuff, but I have no idea where they came from. However, I'm assuming some type of caravan was attacked maybe by outlanders or somebody, because I noticed these items were laying there and then there was a trail of blood going through our tunnel, but no bodies. Perhaps we have some stalkers skulking around in the desert dunes. One of our nearby settlements had contacted us a little bit later saying that they had a weapon engineer of legendary status. However, he too would be needing a little bit of funding for this legendary weapon that he was supposedly creating. Of course, we tossed him 2,000 silver, no big deal. Cheeseman then ended up finishing the extensive research into fueled ASRGs. But now it was time for us to actually put put that research into action by building a few of them. We would end up digging out a pretty fairly sized room just west of our storage room. We were sure to leave the walls at least 4 tiles thick, and we also built some steel doors onto it. That way if something catastrophic were to happen, we should be fairly safe. And the explosion should be contained within this room, or at least that's the idea. In the meantime, I would have Richard begin working on a cloth lab coat for Cheeseman, since he's going to be working with Downs in her lab. With an intellect like theirs together, there's no scientific discovery that we won't be able to achieve. Speaking of which, I wanted our scientific achievements of our mech suits that we had in Season 1 to be built once again. Our mech garage has been empty for far too long. The only problem is we are missing a lot of plasteel. But that's never been much of a problem for us before, as we have plenty of weapons, ammo, and even a little bit of armor that we can trade for plasteel, as well as other resources that we may need. We would swiftly load all of this up into the eye and prepare it for another flight. But before we could take off, our weapons engineer that we provided funding to delivered his product and on his promise. He has produced a new type of weapon that he has appropriately named the Vector Shot. Since Greffis has been our guinea pig for body modification, exosuit frames, and basically everything else up until this point, I thought it may be best if he test out this weapon as well. An interesting piece of weapon technology to say the least. It was something like grenades, but it fired in burst, which was useful, I suppose. We would then end up having a major prison break with Michael, Sergio, and Kaz attempting to break out of their cells and leave the facility, which we couldn't allow, as I'm sure you know. It would seem that the Marshals and the Rebels aren't only teaming up on the battlefield, but also here in our prison. We would send in all nearby mercenaries to try and quell this rebellion, even if it meant that we had to kill some of the prisoners. Because if they were to make it outside these prison doors and get to any weapons, the results would be absolutely disastrous. But I am quite happy to report that it doesn't seem that that's going to be the case, as we have successfully stopped all of them. We'll need to take them back to their prison cells to try and ensure that they don't die either from blood loss or from infections. As you might imagine, our mechanoids, like little Lefty here, don't get cleaned all that often, so when he bashes you over the head with his little shotgun arm, there's a good chance of bacteria getting in the wound. I don't think Kaj will have to worry about that though. Looks like the blood loss took him out before we could try to patch him up. That's a shame. Well, that being said, even though he's making his way out to the body pile, at least we still have 3 more hostages as leverage. Now with our little prison escape artists tucked firmly back into their beds, we're going to be sending Commando Jr. out to the Union's territory to do some trading with them. And in the meantime, while he's out doing that, I also spotted this really beautiful looking iguana with a super cool pattern that I ended up finally taming after a few days of trial and error. Feel free to leave some names suggestions in the comment section down below, please and thanks. Commando Jr. had finally returned with what could only be described as a shit ton of plasteel and a few handfuls of normal steel as well. And finally, thanks to his efforts and these resources, we'll be able to build ourselves a brand new mech. This is the first time we've had one in a very long time, but I can't think of a name for it. I did, however, notice that the United Rebel Forces were requesting that we meet them in a nearby location to discuss peace talks with them, just like we had with the Marshals. I'm sure you guys will let me know if we should do this with them, but this did give me an idea for the name of our mech as well. My friends, I introduce to you the mech known as Diplomacy. Fit with its new paint job, it is more than ready to stomp a few heads and start bashing in a few brains, if you know what I'm saying, along with Greffis, its operator. Thanks to his exoframe, he should be much more proficient at operating this mech suit than others. Perhaps someday we'll have an entire fleet of these that Greffis can be the captain of. All jokes aside though, these peace talks with the rebels are a very serious situation. I would like to make peace, of course, with them, but I would also like for them to be back at war with the Marshal Service or another force. I want to sell them guns and I want to make money, essentially. We're not making near as much money as we would be selling to these smaller factions like the Union and the Outlanders, of course, right? If the opportunity presents itself, I'm thinking maybe some false flag operations. Just a little something to ignite the flames of war once more. Speaking of war, it would seem that we have quite the raid coming across our border. A massive group of raiders from the cult of the Yam. I have no doubt in my mind that this is the exact same cult that was performing rituals in the Outlands and that even killed one of our informants. Splitting him open and disemboweling him. One thing is for sure, we don't want to get taken hostage by any of these bastards. We swiftly rushed all of our mercenaries into the pillbox so that they may man our turrets and our missile launchers. I hope to make quick work out of these underwhelming forces. Though what they lack in equipment and firepower, they do make up for in numbers. It would also be the perfect opportunity for Greffis to try out the new mech suit. Perhaps these cultists just need a little bit of diplomacy. The vast majority of them would be completely crushed by our mech. Those who were foolish enough to survive would be met with several rocket barrages as well as our machine guns. We'll make these filthy monsters beg for mercy, but there will be none to find. By this point, our defenses, as well as the mech, had taken out the majority of their forces, so we had a little firing squad come out and finish off those who remained. And just like that, we had finally achieved victory, leaving most of the surviving cultists in a pool of their own blood and or urine. Some of their surviving members, though, had decent skill sets, so I thought we might try to tend to them and maybe try to recruit them. Now, it's not exactly what you think. I do have something in mind for them. In the meantime, though, we did get plenty of mediocre-ish weapons as well as some metal blood serum from all of the cultists, so we're going to begin hauling all those into our armory so that we may begin selling them as well and making something of a profit. Okay, sure, some of their melee weapons and or weapons in general were most likely used in some type of Lovecraftian horror ritual thing, but we don't have to tell our customers that. After we had gotten everything settled though, we would take our new cultist compadres into the brainwashing rooms and leave them to their own devices, as well as whatever video was always playing at all times. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, by this point, with our production of weapons, as well as all the weapons that we keep getting from these raids and other events that are happening, we need more room in our armory to store all these. So naturally, the only acceptable solution here is for us to dig out yet another small section of the mountain right next to the armory to give it a little bit of an expansion and or upgrade. As we were doing so, one of the more prominent leaders in the Outlands had contacted us and actually had something of a proposition for us. It would seem that he actually has 2 captured prisoners from one of their enemy factions there in the Outlands. There's so many factions, it's hard to keep track, but anyhow, if we were to keep them for quite a while until his prison is ready, he would give us some gold, a heavy engine, and even some hyperweave, so of course we accepted. These prisoners are actually suffering from paralytic abasia, which essentially just means they're sick and cannot move at all, so it's kind of like cat sitting, except the cat is glued to the floor. Sounds like easy money to me. All we have to do is ensure that we feed them every so often and change out their bedpans maybe, I don't know, once a week or something, who knows. With that finally taken care of though, we could actually begin finishing up our new expansion to the armory. We would end up adding 6 new weapon lockers, 2 new weapon racks, and 2 new big shelves. And all this brand new storage space should help us out immensely. We had also finally recruited the martial soldier known as Michael, and he would actually be the first to go into the new section of the armory and begin equipping some weapons as well as armor that we had available. I have seen you guys leaving some great comments about trying to get everyone some proper uniforms in place so that everyone has the same, standard uniform, so that's something we'll work on in the near future as well. But as for now, we have a few surgeries to perform. We would actually end up replacing Greffis' prosthetic arms with 2 brand new bionic arms, further increasing his manipulation and his badassery, if I do say so myself. We also ended up building a new type of assembly bench which will actually allow us to build some modular types of equipment like armor. And the first type of modular armor and equipment we would be working on was a little bit of armor for Greffis himself. As mentioned earlier, he is all too often our guinea pig for these new sets of armor and exoframes and everything, but I like to think of him as an innovator. As you can see, this new armor has quite a sleek design, but it also allows allows Greffis to carry around much larger weapons like this flamer, which I personally believe will come in quite handy during combat situations. However, this armor is not power armor, and it should be noted because that does mean that Greffis will not be able to use anything as large as, say, an autocannon. But that is okay, of course, because this is just the prototype, the beginning, if you will, into something so much greater. The type of armor that Greffis is wearing is our future, my friends. A brand new era in not only the armor of our mercenaries, but the equipment and the weapons as well. There's so much that we can do here. We are spearheading the movement towards these innovative technologies, and I am damn proud of it. Now, I will say I do like this modular armor, but I think I'm going to work around off camera, just kind of mix and match with some more of these items and see what I like as a standard uniform for our people. A bit of trial and error, of course. Either way, though, we're going to have a hard time trying to get enough resources, I would say, to make an entire uniform for every single mercenary under our control, but we'll figure it out. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, where, my friends, at the moment, we're currently having something of a prison break. It would seem that some of our prisoners from the Outlands weren't exactly who they said they were. Oh, that slippery Oak Foundation, I would be lying if I said I weren't impressed. We're sending in some additional troops to the prison to try and quell this rebellion before it gets too out of hand, including our protection mechanoids Lefty and Righty, who unfortunately were subdued by the prisoners. Michael and Shinichi would attempt to push forward to try and ensure that they don't have any way of escape. Shinichi chucked a grenade into the middle of them, and that ended up doing the trick. Well, now that they're no longer a threat, we'll try to tend to the ones that are still alive. As you might have noticed, we had to take some drastic, more violent measures there to ensure that they didn't get out. And in doing so, we killed quite a few of them. We also done a lot of damage to our prison, although most of that was by the prisoners who were trying to escape. As I had mentioned earlier, our two little mechanical defenders here ended up getting destroyed during the battle, although they're actually still somewhat intact, so we should be able to bring them back theoretically. We'll toss them into the gestator and see how it goes. Currently, of course, we're a bit low on resources, and our prison is in disarray, and we're not going to be able to really repair it anytime soon, so I ended up digging out some rooms for some solitary confinement. Since our little rebels here don't enjoy the recreation hours that they get, we'll make sure that they don't see the light of day for a very long time. But while they're rotting away in their holes in the dark, we are going to be furthering our innovative knowledge in the form of research into auto doors. Realistically, we should have researched this a very long time ago, but here we are. A little bit of time later though, and Cheeseman had finally finished up the research. Now with this fairly basic prerequisite technology under our belts, we could actually begin researching security doors for our prison. Not only are they much more convenient to walk through, but they are also much stronger than ordinary auto doors. Hopefully this will help us ensure that we don't have another breakout. As you well know though, the research won't do us any damn good if we don't have the resources to actually repair our prison and to install these new doors, so we're actually going to be loading up plenty of weapons, ammo, and some armor to fly out to the Thromboian Union to do a little bit of trading, of course. Not only to make a pretty penny off of them, but also, of course, to ensure that they are well and able to protect themselves and maybe sow a little bit of chaos. But also, yeah, to make money. As we were flying overhead on the way back home, though, we noticed that there was a bombardment site in the mountains in rebel territory. Now, this had happened several hours after we had just dropped off a shit ton of guns and ammo to the Thromboian Union, so I'm guessing it might have something to do with them. Since we don't know who the other faction giving the Union so much trouble is, we're going to be taking our aerial vehicles, and we're also also going to be sending Shinichi and Greffus. Our vehicles should allow for a quick getaway if things were to get too hairy, and of course, Shinichi and Greffus have the best armor out of all of our mercenaries. Just as well, they both have some kick-ass bionics, making them the strongest members. Don't let yourselves forget, there's a good reason that Shinichi is the leader of our army. We're also sending Commando Jr. because he's the most handsome. But with that, lads and lasses, we are off. It's time to make the donuts, baby. And by that, I mean watch a battle and pick up all the guns after everyone's dead. Speaking of which, a couple hours later, we had finally arrived. It would appear that it is the Marshal Service who is fighting with the Union, and they're not faring too well either. You know, change is quite different for some folks, and I don't think that the Marshals nor the Rebels have ever quite gotten used to the fact that the Union now uses automatic weapons instead of a bow and arrow. This appeared to be a fairly small trade caravan from the Marshals, most likely hoping to go about their day undetected. Unfortunately for them, that was not the case, and they all seem to be dead, or at least on the brink of death. Well, either way, this would be a great opportunity for us to jump in and maybe pick up some of these auto cannons here, because they are worth a lot of money. Just as well as all the other equipment that we most likely sold to them in Season 1, so, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle. Some of the most useful things that we got from that little skirmish between the two factions, though, wasn't actually the weapons, no, it was the plasteel and the steel, which, as you might imagine, would significantly help us out when it came to repairing our prison. We added in the security doors, as I had previously mentioned, but I also ended up adding the two larger rooms that previously was for the slaves of the company, but we don't really have slaves anymore, so we're going to use that for prisoners again. As you can see as well, the security doors are just as fast as auto doors, except they can take a lot more of a pounding. I also ended up noticing that our iguana Blood Diamond damn near died because a fox got a hold of him. Thankfully, the ugly little bastard was stopped when he was shot by Gak with his rifle a few times. But that evening, the perpetrator would attack Iguana 1 once more, trying to eat him before he was shot to death. Thankfully, our sweet, scaly little babies were safe and sound. However, this near-death experience did make me realize that I needed to name Iguana 1, who we tamed last episode, and you wonderful people have provided many wonderful names, and we are going to be calling him Ambassador, a very bougie and fitting name for this gorgeous, majestic creature. And this wonderful name comes from our good friend SuBoy3909. The name was chosen as something of an homage to the piece that we made with the Marshals last episode. Speaking of which, based on the two most liked comments on the last episode, it would seem that you would all like for me to make peace with the Rebels as well, which is completely understandable, and I do agree with you. However, I will say that I don't think I really want to make peace with both sides until I get them back fighting again, or until I get another faction large enough and strong enough that it's a common enemy. I need chaos for money. So for now, we're going to put peace on the back burner. But staying on the topic of kitchen metaphors, the brains of the cultists that we captured last episode have been scrambled by our brainwashing rooms. Now, initially, this might not sound like a good thing, but with their brains scrambled and their ideological beliefs completely destroyed, that does mean that we'll be able to recruit them and possibly, with a lot of time and therapy, rehabilitate them. In the meantime, Richard had just returned from a meeting with some of our nearby settlement leaders in the area, and he even picked up a newspaper on his way home. Would you look at that? An independent news outlet that's not under the thumb of any of the factions. That is rare to see nowadays. It would seem this little article is about us arming the Forgotten as well as the Thromboian tribes. Let them sing our praises. A little bit of time later, I noticed that we were having a slight dip in our crop yield, so I was going to build some sprinklers in all of our growing areas. That way we can try to get our onions and peppers and everything grown much faster and much more efficiently. Water, the building block of life. Yet another miracle we've managed to accomplish in the Noquan Desert. After that, one of our rambunctious rebels, the purple Thromboian prisoner, was getting a little bit wild, and we had to put him back in his place. Truth be told, I think he might be my favorite prisoner of the three. He has a lot of spirit. It will be quite a challenge to break it, and I love a challenge. And with that being said, it is now time for our Thromboian Union compadres that have been visiting us for a while to go back home. It's actually been overdue for them to go back home for the last few days. I just wasn't really paying attention. Anyhow, though, we would send them home and the quest was complete. The Union would then send us our reward, a bit of uranium, a harp, sharp and a legendary rifle from a previous war. I'm thinking we may put that rifle on display, but I'm not sure yet. We may end up giving it to Richard or Scott as a gift. Speaking of weapons and armor though, we would have Graphists begin making plenty of new helmets that will actually be a core part of the uniform and apparel of our soldiers. You could think of these as something of a prototype, as they're not quite as effective at protecting the user as Graphists' helmet, but they are still quite useful. And probably the best part, they are a uniform look for everyone. We want our mercenaries to have a uniform but also a memorable look to them. And I think the green really pops out here in the desert. It's a nice stark contrast. And a big reason for this is because I hope to maybe get into the field of personal security, kind of hired defense. Selling weapons is great and all, but I think this season it's really helped me understand that during times of peace, people are most likely and more than likely to just hire you to protect their caravans from bandits and looters and things of that sort. But what's even better than that is if everyone's at war and we're also doing personal security, so, you know. We would also go throughout our settlements and commission these new armors for all of our mercenary squads as well, and we would even create a new squad that, as you might have guessed, is only going to include soldiers with this type of armor. Now, given the more expensive nature of this new armor, it's going to be a little while before we phase out the old helmets, but we'll get around to it eventually. It can be a bit of a rough learning curve here, because in normal RimWorld terms, we are swimming in silver and completely rich, but in terms of the third most powerful and third largest empire on the planet of Degum, we're still floundering around on occasion to try and scramble up enough silver to pay all of our hired guns across the planet. It would be nice if we had some type of central trade authority or some type of bank or something. Sometime later, we ended up having a small group of police officers coming from the martial settlements to do a bit of trading with us. It would seem, since their government has stopped purchasing weapons from us, that they are a bit under-equipped to handle crimes in their communities, so they're having to take matters into their own hands. This could be a good sign that there may be a bit of political pressure building against the Marshal Service to do a bit more trading with us once more. This could be a good opportunity for us to give them a push in the right direction. But as we ponder our options and begin to formulate a plan, we also received intel by some of our nearby cities that the cultists that attacked us last episode have a temporary base not too far from HQ. They've set up shop at the ancient ruins of an old military installation. It's just off the side of the highway. It would seem that they've been hiding in plain sight for quite a while. This base is probably how they managed to sneak such a large raid in on us last episode as well. For this operation, we were going to be going on the offensive this time around, sending all of our mercenaries out in Shinichi's revival. Just as well, we would also be sending Greffis out in his mech known as Diplomacy to bring them a little bit of swift justice. We would end up arriving some odd hours later, and even from our position on the road, we could see that this place was absolutely crawling with those filthy bastard cultists. Though I could understand as to why we hadn't noticed them being here previously. Unless you had gotten quite close to this structure, you would never even notice them wandering around. With us being this close, we also had spotted a Thromboian gentleman who was dressed as a scientist. A little odd, to say the least. Even more strange, it would seem that they've repaired the communications network of this military base, which is odd because who would they need to be contacting? I think the only way that we can really find out is by cracking open their doors and maybe a few of their heads. That way we can acquire the information. Because of the high concentrations of debris near the road, we'll be sending our soldiers in on foot. Now, as you can see, unlike the truck, our mech wouldn't have any issue navigating the terrain here, even around all this debris. I would also have it jumping around the terrain towards the enemies, but the animation was broken, so you couldn't really see it, unfortunately. One little sly dog managed to hit us with a triple rocket launcher, but Diplomacy was unfazed. We would show him what real rockets looked like. As our men began to surround the building before entering, we had noticed after killing the scientist, he had dropped a large pile of uranium. What in the name of God are they working on in here? We began to enter the facility, but as we did, we were notified of an infestation that was happening just outside the doors where we were. This did throw a little bit of a wrench in our plans, as we were not only now fighting the cultists, but these large insectoids, although our mech made it quite easy. Once that threat was taken care of, Shinichi would lead some of the men inside the building where they encountered a cultist wielding another triple rocket launcher. We would quickly subdue him before he had the opportunity to take us to hell with him. But even after doing so, we began to ponder where they got this heavy weaponry. Things are not adding up here. We would continue clearing out the facility, only encountering one other cultist who we would quickly kill as well. And with that, we had cleared all the rooms except for one. The final room was the most interesting of all. We encountered yet another scientist who got a little too handsy with us, and we shot her to death. She too had dropped a small pile of uranium, and the room seemed to be something of a makeshift laboratory. Even more concerning was a bomb in the corner of the room. But this bomb was not your average explosive device. It was a dirty nuclear warhead. They've been here for months on end cooking this up, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Thank God we stopped them in time. Before we left, we were sure to destroy their communication array, that way whoever's been funding them here wouldn't be able to contact them any longer. I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyhow, that this is most likely the work of the Oak Foundation, the lucrative, secretive branch of intelligence for the United Rebel Forces, for any of you who may have forgotten. As we were heading back home though, we had received notification that our headquarters was about to be sieged. Those damn rebels had us right in the palm of their hands, knowing that we wouldn't be able to make it back in time. Led by the infamous General Shortus, a well-known rebel leader, and husband to President Tree herself, the president of all rebel nations and associated territories. But I'm afraid the bad news doesn't end there. They also brought along with them a dirty nuclear warhead. Any form of reinforcements were far too slow. The only opportunity we would have to save ourselves would be to try to hit that nuclear warhead with some explosive shells from our artillery cannons. I'm afraid in our panic though, scurrying as fast as we could to try and take them out, we had completely missed both shots, and the rebels would begin to load their nuclear warhead into their cannon. The only thing we could do now was to rush inside and try to make it to the safest room that we could on the other side of the building, under all of this mountain, taking shelter in our armored room with our own nuclear arsenal. The rebels were about to change our lives forever. Thankfully, we were all still alive. We had managed to get ourselves deep enough within the mountain that we were not disintegrated by the nuke. But most of our base was completely obliterated in literal seconds. Everything towards the front of the base was destroyed, including our battery room. Thankfully though, our backup power had kicked in just like we hoped. We won't be able to hide out for long though, because those uranium generators will eventually run out of fuel. Just as well, our animals and we ourselves were already beginning to feel the effects of a dirty nuclear bomb. Radiation sickness had us in its deathly tight grip. We began racking our brains for a plan, as the rebels weren't going anywhere. As a matter of fact, they would continue sieging the base. It would seem that they want everything reduced to ashes. Thank God, though, our reinforcements had finally arrived back home, and they would swiftly begin engaging our enemies. The rebels had hidden themselves between the small hills of the desert, so we would have to try to attack them on foot. Greffus would waste no time using the Mechs' abilities against them, though. Unfortunately, due to prior damage, it was destroyed during the chaos. But Greffus himself, as well as all the other mercenaries, would not falter so easily. Pressing forward, fighting for our home, we would push our enemies out of our territory and away from our home. General Shortus and his men would begin a retreat out of the area. Not so fast, you son of a bitch. The general, with his mighty antique sword from previous wars, would try to take on Shinichi and his chainsaw. A big mistake, and his final one. The general has been defeated. His sword, his minigun, and better yet, his soul is ours to be claimed. Though with his life taken, the damages that he has committed against us have not been undone. The rebels' transgressions and sins today have not been forgotten, nor will they ever. Even when we make peace with them, we will never forgive them. And we will only be making any type of peace with them once we have taken what is ours, sweet revenge. As we began to return back to what was left of our base, a nuclear fallout began to settle in the area. At the very least, I was grateful that our armory was intact, as that's where we kept all of our gas masks. Not all of our people would have to wear these masks though, as some of us, like Shinichi and Richard here, already have masks that filter out any nuclear waste. Even with the absolute destruction of the majority of our base, luckily our workshop as well as our storage depot was completely safe and fine. And this was crucial because these were the resources that we would need to use to rebuild. For the time being, we're just going to be building a high security fence around the perimeter. It wasn't exactly what I would consider a top-notch defense, but it was better than just leaving these holes completely open for any more enemies to come in and try to kill us. With that though, the next phase of the nuke would begin. The psychological phase. As you can see, Kate here is having terrifying hallucinations. No doubt partially brought on by the fact that a nuke was dropped on the place where she lives, but also most likely due to radiation sickness as well. Gak became quite hungry and decided that he was going to quit. This would also be partially blamed on the nuke and radiation sickness, I'm sure. But we can't have any quitters around here. Shinichi himself would arrest him. If he wasn't going to be recruited back into our ranks, his only other option would be in the labor camps in the Outlands, or perhaps a bullet for desertion. We would end up using many of our remaining resources to build a new type of chopper, and as we were doing so, the nuclear fallout had began to settle and seemed to clear up just a bit. Now, because this new chopper is a Cherokee helicopter versus the Mosquito, small, simple helicopters we've had in the past, this one is going to take quite a bit longer to be constructed, so in the meantime, we would also begin making some crucial repairs to the inside of our headquarters. The next morning, Richard would finally finish up the Cherokee helicopter. Now, of course, you guys are more than welcome to give this bad boy a good name. Now, there is a special reason that I've chose this specific type of helicopter. It specializes in hauling tons of cargo, and in this particular situation, those tons of cargo are going to be tons upon tons of silver. Richard, as well as Scott, would be loading up into this new helicopter, and they're going to be going to the Outlands to buy a special product. Now, I understand if you're a bit confused, because we just had a nuclear bomb dropped on our base. Why would we already be going out to try and trade with Outlanders? What is the point of this? I can promise you, my friends, this is exactly what we want and what we need. For you see, my friends, there's something we've been pondering on doing for quite a while, and for the low price of 10,000 silver, we can get our revenge on the rebels. I'd like to introduce you to our new friend, Shadow. Shadow here is known as the chameleon of the Outlands. She takes on many faces from many factions, and she is a professional assassin, the best of the best. Hello everyone, and welcome back, my friends, to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, where, my compadres, we are currently having a few power issues. As you could imagine, at the end of last episode, when a small, dirty nuclear warhead was dropped near the base, it completely wiped out all of our sources of power generation. So, you know, well, all power sources except for our small nuclear reactors. However, these barely keep on 2 or 3 light bulbs, so we're going to end up building a mid-sized one to try to help us out with that. I'm afraid though, even with our mid-sized reactor, we won't be able to keep all our lights on nor our electronics going, so we're going to need to build some additional small ones as well. And in the meantime, we're also going to be working on an advanced nuclear generator as well, as this is going to be much larger and thus put out a shit ton more power that we'll be able to keep on the inside of the base instead of outside, so it should be completely safe from attacks. Now you might be asking yourself, Rat Daddy, you stupid robot, rodent, how are you going to do any research if you can't even power your research bench? Well, my good friend, that is where this little tiny portable chem fuel generator comes in handy. This bad little mamma jamma is going to get our asses back out of the dark ages and get some lights going on around here, as well as getting our ammo and weapon production back up and running. I'm not going to lie to you though, most of today will most likely be us doing some repairs around the base like we're doing right now, trying to fix the gate entrance on our eastern side. Unfortunately, I did notice that our Toxalope mistake, as well as all of our Boomalope, were beginning to starve to death. We ended up feeding them some of our food, corn in particular. If you remember last episode and the bomb, yeah, all that stuff, that actually ended up rendering our fields outside completely useless, so we can't grow hay out there. Speaking of which, we noticed something strange outside. Those appeared to be Marshal Service vehicles, though we could hardly tell from the ground. Couldn't imagine where they might be rushing to. Nevertheless, we still have plenty of work that needs to be done around here, like repairing our western gate and fixing the garage doors for our mech garage. Also, as you might imagine, our new nuclear generators that we're researching are going to be quite large, so we're going to need a lot more room in our generator room. We began digging out a very large section of the room and adding in all of our pretty little flooring. Just to be safe though, because we were getting awful close to our bedrooms and our mech gestating room, I decided to add in some super armored walls. We've already seen what a nuclear explosion right in front of the base can do. I'd really hate to see what one that was uncontrolled could do from the inside. We would also end up adding in another mid-sized nuclear power generator, although this really didn't do all that much. I suppose we did get a few extra lights on around the base, so it's worth something. As you all probably remember from last episode, we ended up building a Cherokee helicopter towards the end. However, we don't have a good landing spot for it yet. So as we were replacing a lot of our paths that the bomb had destroyed, we would also end up building a nice landing pad for the helicopter. Everything has a place and everything is now in its place. And with that, it's time that we give the helicopter a proper name. I've decided to go with the name of Vengeance, for what I think would be obvious reasons. And this awesome name was suggested by our good compadre, Flying Squirrel 99, so thank you, sir, and or madam. Marsupial? I don't know. In the meantime, while we're waiting on our new research to be completed, we ended up building some storage shelves in our reactor room. That way we can put all of our uranium in there, as these are the only things we have that actually use uranium. Well, for now, that is. But before we get to what I'm alluding to, I think it's a good time for us to go ahead and build plenty of floodlights all around the HQ. One, because most of the wall lights that we were using previously were blown all to hell with the nuclear explosion, of course, and two, because I think it gives it a more uniform, militaristic look. But now, my friends, we get to our little uranium devil. I introduce to you a brand new type of mech known as Mother. Now, this abbreviation stands for Mechanized Overseer with Tactical Heavy Energy Response for Enforcement and Retaliation. This is the future, my friends. A brand new class of these mechs that will be piloted and tested by Greffus himself, as he is basically our little super soldier by this point. I thought it fitting, of course, since he was the operator of our previous mech, and sticking with that, we'll also be naming this one Diplomacy Mark II. Perhaps, though, you doubt the true power of this new mech, allow me to demonstrate. For you see, my friends, Diplomacy Mark II has two dual-barrel plasma cannons, as well as a bombardment targeter, which will allow any nearby settlements of ours to actually lock on to a certain section that we target and hit it with a bunch of mortar fire. Now that is some top-tier warfare technology, if you ask me. Speaking of technology, we had finally harnessed the power of nuclear fusion. Well, we've already had that power in the form of a bomb, but this time it's going to generate power and energy for us in a different way. However, we will also be needing some resources as we're running quite low, but just on time came a Marshal Settlements caravan. These fine men and women of uniform have brought plenty of bulk goods like steel, components, and even a few car parts that we would end up purchasing in exchange, of course, for pistols and rifles and body armor so they can effectively protect their towns. With these resources forces, we could finally build our very first advanced nuclear-powered generator, and boy oh boy is she bodacious. With all the nukes and everything we've been building, we should really start making somebody some hazmat suits and have them assigned to these areas. Either way though, our power issues were no more, and we should be able to support some new weapons as well with the additional power generation. Now, all this talk about nuclear weapons and power, the little plan we had from last episode where we maybe or maybe not paid someone to assassinate the leader of the RimWorld Marshal Service, it's actually not complete yet. We're going to be flying a small nuclear warhead out towards the Outlands, but we're actually going to the Thromboian Union where we would sell it to them. They've basically become a proxy state of ours, whether they like it or not. And giving them a nuke and or selling them a nuke, that means if they use it against the rebels, it puts more pressure on the rebels, from all sides essentially. If they use it on the Marshals, perhaps we could try and spin it as the rebels giving them the weaponry. We'll figure something out if that happens to be the case. The Union would end up paying us top dollar for that little warhead, and they even gave us a special type of tribal stone. Apparently in their culture, this is a gesture of gratefulness and good faith. It had some interesting properties to it, and because of the neuroformer that is inside of Down's brain, we decided to put it in her lab as she seems to have some sort of connection to it, she says. We weren't back home for very long though before we ended up having a massive raid come our way. It would seem to be many a rebel soldier along with many of their mechanoids as well, some that we had never even seen before. It seems that they're producing more mechs and less vehicles. Either way though, we also saw some tribal soldiers along with them. I found this to be quite unusual, but then I realized that they have now allied with the Confederacy of Banya, meaning most likely that just like us, they too are raising a large tribal faction out of the dirt and molding it into something they need. Unfortunately for them, our military machine doesn't give a shit about cultural backgrounds. We would immediately call in bombardments from some of our nearby settlements, which would destroy a lot of their forces. However, there were still quite a few that remained. We would attempt to run them over, although Diplomacy Mark II wasn't near as fast as Mark I. Luckily, our plasma cannons would do the trick. I witnessed their mechanoid fire off a gigantic blast. Two gigantic blasts. With firepower like that, no doubt this bad boy has some rare metals inside of him, so we ran him over. That way we could deconstruct him and take all of the plasteel and everything. It'll help us out. We would also end up getting some squishy little meat stuck in our treads. Blech. With the battle finally over, we had plenty of rebels that we could also take hostage and keep them as leverage. Now, previously we did think keeping hostages of the rebels would keep them from nuking us, but as we've seen already, that wasn't exactly the case. Now, credit where credit is due, they did only nuke us after failing to infiltrate the base several times, so I digress. Now, you might be asking yourself, Rat Knight, why are you even interested in taking any more rebel prisoners? Well, you see, my friends, the larger our rebel gulag, the more of them that we have, the more points we'll get towards peace when we decide to free them and give them back to the United Rebel Forces. But now, of course, that will only be one after we've taken our revenge for them nuking our base, and also after they're back at war with the Marshals. But before we enact any plans of revenge, we are still going to need to make some improvements to the base once more, and in doing so, we're also going to need some of these precious metals that these mechs have. We'll be using these precious little metals to rebuild our main battery room in the front of the base. Now, before you scold me in the comments section, though, I realize that this isn't exactly the safest place for the battery room, as we've seen in prior invasions and bombings, but I am actually going to be doubling up the special armored walls here to try and keep it extra safe. After that, one of our very own settlements had contacted us requesting some simple helmets, as they've been having some issues out of desert bandits and even some more of those cultists here and there. In exchange, they would give us advanced components, hyperweave, and a heavy engine, all of which would come in very handy. Plus, we didn't really mind as we already had plenty of simple helmets in storage. We loaded them up and would take them over to the settlement. Hopefully that'll help them out with their little issue. And hopefully this new engine will help us build some much larger and stronger vehicles. As we were hauling it in though, we spotted a very strange caravan. A good-sized group of people wearing business suits, business attire in the desert of all places. these weren't your standard Outlanders. The leader of this little outfit appeared to be an older, more distinguished-looking gentleman by the name of Dibbo. It looked like he had some personal security along with him and some armor that we had never seen before, although we obviously weren't all that impressed. Since he and his companions had caught our eye, we decided that we would speak with them. Apparently, he is one of the founding members of a new economic and banking faction called the United Traders, and he was hoping that we might be his first investor. Once things get off the ground, he even said that he would like to maybe hire us as his own personal security force. So we ended up investing 20,000 silver. What's the harm? Even if he were to be lying to us, we'll kick his door in the Outlands and skin him alive. But hopefully we don't need to. And the possibility of us being partnered with a neutral trading faction? Could you imagine the money? Meanwhile, back in the base, we were alerted to a global news broadcast by the RimWorld Marshal Service. It would seem to me that they found a temporary replacement for Commander Ross after his little mishap. Governor Pajek, as it were. Yes, a declaration of war against the United Rebel Forces. I guess we got our money's worth, eh? It would seem to me that our little scheme is going right according to plan. And step 2 of our 2-step process that I mentioned earlier is complete. Get the Marshals and the Rebels back at war. But we still need to get our revenge for the rebels nuking us. And I think Greffus and his new mech could really help us out with step 1 in getting the revenge that we so require. I realize I'm working backwards. Now, we are a greedy, money-hungry, blood-lusting corporation, but unlike in real life, we do actually care if innocent people get hurt. So instead of attacking a rebel city where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians that could lose their lives, and almost definitely would, we're actually going to be attacking a smaller Oak Foundation military installation near the hills. It's also located just within range of 2 of our settlements, meaning that we'll also be able to use our bombardment targeter for our mortars. This base is most likely the staging ground for many of their attacks against us and the Marshals, and it was absolutely crawling with soldiers along with many of their mech types. It appeared that they also had 2 heavy Saturn-class tanks that were sitting on the outskirts on either side of the base. We'll need to be very careful because one shot from these bad boys could render our mech completely immobile, if not destroy it. We may be tough as nails, but we're not invincible. We began to approach the base, and it was quite a tight squeeze going down the city streets, I'll admit, scraping our guns on the sides of buildings. This would essentially render our plasma cannons useless, but we would be able to use our targeter to have the artillery strikes right in the middle of the base, completely annihilating many of the soldiers and their buildings, meaning they would have to flee their city if they had any hope of trying to defeat us, which they didn't. We then received some exquisite news. It would seem that the Marshals have come to reinforce us. Now, granted, they had only sent a small battalion of men and mechs, but it was better than nothing, and we were happy to have them on our side, especially since the heavy class tank decided to focus on them. They basically became cannon fodder as we attempted to destroy it, which ultimately we ended up doing. With their heavy class vehicles completely destroyed, the only option that the rebels and the Oak Foundation had were to try to flee the area, which we would allow some of them to do because, why not? Let them go and spread the word of the devastating experience you receive when you cross the SNR Rifle Company. And you know what the best part is? What took them months and months of endless planning, a nuclear bomb, and several failed attempts to try and infiltrate our base only took us a few hours with one singular mech. And once we finally have our headquarters operational at full capacity once more, and we don't have to expend resources on trying to make repairs after their little bomb dropped on us, imagine what we could use those resources on. Perhaps even more of these mechs. We could even use them on different armors and upgrades for our people so that they may utilize these mechs just as Greffus. But sadly, that is still a little bit of time away. As for now, we're going to continue using those resources to try and repair the base and also build some new upgrades to our defenses, such as these very large sentry turrets that we're going to be putting at our eastern entrance. They have about the same damage output as the auto turrets we were previously previously using, but with a much higher fire rate. A bit of time later and I had realized that Commando Jr. here was missing his left arm and his right hand. Unfortunately, this would render him completely incapable of manipulation. And as you might imagine, that's a bit of a problem for us. Not to worry though, because we would end up giving him the prosthetic arms that we had previously taken off Greffus when we upgraded him to the bionics. I'm sure we probably washed them before we ended up putting them on Commando Jr., probably. All seemed to be going quite well, and in our favor finally, once more. We were making awesome repairs to the base, we were upgrading our people. If you can call prosthetics an upgrade, I suppose it's better than having nothing at all. Things were going very swimmingly, but little did I know they were about to get much better. For you see, my friends, our informants in the Outlands have told us of an ongoing battle between a rebel settlement and a Thromboian settlement. Funny enough, that looks like the same Union settlement that we sold the nuclear warhead to. Well, just as we had hoped. It would seem that the rebels in the Confederacy of Benya are completely on the back foot once more. War would once again dominate the two factions, and we now have our revenge. Our plan was a complete success. Now the only thing left for us to do is to make peace with the rebels, once we're ready, I suppose. I'm sure they'll be ecstatic to do so, seeing how they're going to need plenty of weapons if they ever hope to defend themselves. Well, just in case they get a wild hair about them and decide to retaliate against us once more, we're going to continue working on our own defenses. In this case, we're actually building more large sentry turrets on the western entrance of the headquarters. We then ended up having a wild man enter the area. Now this happens quite a bit out here in the desert. Maybe somebody gets a bit too stoned on yayo or something, but this particular man was a bit familiar. None other than the infamous General Hawthorne himself. We sent a squadron down because even without his armor he was still quite dangerous, but it would seem that the naked lad had no recollection of who we even were. As a matter of fact, he wouldn't even speak or form sounds. I think his brain is still mashed potatoes. Since the man is basically a walking super weapon, we decided to arrest him politely and take him back to our prison where we would actually be delicate and take very good care of him because he's still very dangerous. I'm not exactly sure what we could do with him, but I know it's better than having him wander around the desert where the Marshal Service could find him again. Speaking of which, we're going to be loading up Vengeance to go out and do a little bit of trading with the Marshal Service. Since they are finally back at war with their old enemies, we can sell them some guns once more, which is amazing because not only are we going to be able to trade for a lot of different things like car parts and other things that I wanted, but we're also going to be able to make a holy shit ton of silver and gold. Oh god, I gotta tell you, it feels so good to be back in business once more. Just like the good old days. Now, some of you might be wondering as to why we were buying more car parts. Did you have a vehicle in mind, Rat Knight? Well, my friend, indeed I did. We are going to be creating a Striker CAV vehicle. You can think of it kind of like an upgrade from our Rattlesnake and our Sand Viper vehicles that we've had in the past. Not only does it have an additional weapon, meaning that it has much more firepower, but the armor of this vehicle is much stronger. And of course, I will bestow the honors of giving it a name onto you guys. It would also seem that while Scott was out previously doing his gun trading in the helicopter, he had picked up a newspaper from one of the Marshal settlements. It seems that they're reporting on the assassination of Commander Ross and the war between the rebels and marshals. I suppose those are some pretty hot topics at the moment. But my friends, we are now winding down to the end of this episode, and I do have some pretty grievous news. I think next episode will be the last episode of Season 2 of this series. There also will not be a Season 3, or at least not in the sense of it being the Gun Empire. Of course, the overall universe, and really even the Gun Empire series, is going to continue, but with a different name and kind of premise, and also we'll be following some different people. As far as I can think, I'm thinking that I'm going to call it RimWorld Rags to Riches, something like that. You've probably seen similar titles and ideas with other types of games. Now, this isn't exactly the same type of thing as what you might see in like The Sims or somewhere like that. But it is going to be a new original series that is going to continue the gun empire as well as the RKRU universe as a whole. I would love to show you something on the screen for it, like a thumbnail or something, but I haven't came up with anything just yet, except for the mod list, which is going to be very similar to this one. You know, I'm having a lot of fun in Season 2 here, but I am very limited by this save file being from the previous version of RimWorld, and all the mods that we've been using, a lot of them are still outdated and stuff like that, so I couldn't exactly do everything that I wanted to do, but I'm pretty happy with what we've accomplished in Season 2 and kind of the direction that we're taking it. I do want to ask you guys though, because we are looking for some official names for the United Rebel Forces in our Gun Empire series in the RKRU. So if you guys have any great names for the rebels, be sure to leave that in the comment section down below. You very well could be the person that names the entire nation of the rebels. But I love you guys ever so much. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Gun Empire series. My friends, it is ever so good to see you back here today for our final episode of Season 2. We're starting off a bit hot and heavy today with some improved defenses. We're actually going to be repairing and reconstructing our old pillbox. It is much smaller than it used to be, but I do plan on expending more of our resources instead of here into some more automated defenses. That way it keeps us safe and sound for the most part. We then had loaded up plenty of weapons and ammo as well as silver, and we planned on going out to do a bit of trading with the RimWorld Marshal Service. Since they're finally purchasing some of our finest weapons once more, it was now affordable again for us to begin buying resources from them like steel, plasteel, and even a little bit of uranium and components. And after returning home, as you can see, we have an absolute shit ton of these resources, which, as I mentioned earlier, I do plan on using on some new types of defenses. And in terms of new, what I mean is that they're new to the base. These are the same types of turrets that you've seen before from last episode, the large sentry turrets, as I believe they are much more effective than autocannons. But I also built some dual cannon autocannons just to be safe. In the meantime, we also thought it might be a good idea to try and work on the psychological well-being of General Hawthorne. He still hasn't spoke at all since we took him prisoner, so we decided a bit of brainwashing / rewiring might help him out a little bit. Although after the process, upon further inspection, he still seems to be something of an empty vessel at the moment. Because of this, with his regenerative properties given to him by his cybernetics, we thought he might make a good experiment. We tested out several different types of drugs on him, and nothing really ever happened. We even gave him a bit of go juice to see if it would get him going, and that didn't work either. It was becoming crystal clear that further research would be needed, so we decided to take a blood sample and take it up to Down's lab so that she may study it further. Perhaps we could figure out what's wrong with him and restore him to his old self. Or perhaps just maybe we could unravel the secrets that the Marshals used to create this monstrosity and create our own brand of super soldiers. Only time shall tell. In the meantime, while we're studying Hawthorne's blood though, we would also end up creating yet another armored vehicle. Which made me remember in the last episode I asked you wonderful people for some names, and you guys provided me with King Cobra for our first armored vehicle. And I had spotted yet another name that I really liked that I think would be perfect for our second one, which is the Copperhead. I would end up giving the King Cobra a more appropriate paint job, and these wonderful names were also provided by our good friend Far Corporate and Jackpot 3673, so thank you both ever so much. In particular, I also like that both of these names were sticking with our venomous snake themes. After that, I began to have a bit of compassion for our rebel prisoners that we had in solitary confinement. It felt like they had served their time, and they were also beginning to have hallucinations, so I thought maybe we should put them back with the general populace. They won't be much good as leverage if they end up like Hawthorne, that's for sure. A bit of time later and we would end up tackling a major project, most likely the largest mining operation that we've actually began since this season or series began, except for the main base overall, which was a large work in progress for a long time. As you can see, it's going to be something of a large entrance tunnel, but also a large garage. Construction was halted when we received the blessed news that Fithel was pregnant with Commando Jr.'s child. Aw, we'll finally have our first little rugrat of our main mercenaries born at the headquarters. It was that same night that one of our settlements had called in to the headquarters explaining that while mining for resources to make weapons and ammunition, they began to feel a very strange presence in the mine with them. Perhaps an ancient, priceless artifact from an ancient Thromboian civilization. We requested that they continue to mine and investigate, and we even sent them in some soldiers. Besides, at the moment, it would seem that we have much bigger fish to fry. An assault from the Oak Foundation, with one of them being the grandnephew of Cheeseman. But do not be deceived by their forces, my friends. Though they may not look like much, and though they may not be in a large number, these are not your average rebel soldiers. They are much more well-trained than your average enlisted rebel. They also tend to sport some very sophisticated armor and weaponry as well. A singular shot from that pulse rifle could easily penetrate our plate carriers, and their standard issue battle mechs now come equipped with a Cyclone minigun. Even one of them single-handedly could lay down an absolute blanket of bullets on the battlefield easily. All of them in this raid led and commanded by the infamous Agent Jinjin, known as the Green Death. An attack from the Oak Foundation is no laughing matter, but luckily we did have something of a strategy up our sleeve. Our sentry turrets would draw their fire just enough until we could open up the gates and send out our armored vehicles. Luckily, the armored plating on these vehicles was just enough to deflect any bullets from the pulse rifles, as well as smash their mechanoids without even a dent on our bumpers. Surprisingly, we would actually make very quick work out of the raiders, and they would begin to flee the area. The Agent Jinjin would end up getting away, unfortunately, but her companions would not be so lucky. We would do our absolute best to try and subdue them before they could leave the area. The more of them that we killed, the more of their weapons we could try to reverse engineer and take for ourselves. Speaking of which, once the chaos had settled after the battle ended, we also noticed that one of the mechanoids still had a persona core intact. A very rare item to come across and damn near impossible to fabricate due to the complexity of its inner workings. We would also end up taking one of the Oak Foundation agents as our prisoner to use as leverage once more whenever we do decide to make peace. We were sure to strip search them to ensure they don't have any satchel charges hidden in any orifices. But now we could and would finally begin finishing up the last little bit of our mega project here with our gigantic garage/tunnel through the mountain. Now you might be asking yourself, Ratty Daddy, why do you need such a massive garage? Well, my dear friends, I am going to be building yet another Mother class mech. Yes indeed, my dear friends, you heard me correctly, yet another of these unstoppable behemoths. This one in particular is going to be named Anarchy, a stark contrast to our other one that is named Diplomacy Mark II, something that was noticed by our good friend Spencer-W3S, who states the mech should be named Anarchy because diplomacy is no longer an option, which is a good idea, but I think diplomacy and anarchy go hand in hand, and so we'll have two of them. We'll be keeping them both in this gigantic tunnel garage here, ready at a moment's notice in case we're invaded or in case we want to do some invading. I must say, we're truly racking up the vehicles and mechs at this point. All commonplace though, given our line of work. Now that we really have things taken care of on the vehicle side though, I wanted to try and get everyone some proper firearms, or at least some more advanced firearms, and I thought the pulse rifles of the Oak Foundation would be perfect. Not only are they extremely powerful, but once again they give us that uniform look that we're going for. With some time and reverse engineering from Downs and Richard, I think we should be able to make these for all of our mercenaries across the planet, making them standard issue for our defense force. Now then, focusing a bit less on invading and attacking and more on diplomacy and business, we've decided to build ourselves something of a meeting room. To be honest with you, I'm actually very shocked that we're only just now doing this. This seems like it would have been very useful in Season 1, but we did conduct a lot of business over radio transmission, so I guess it makes sense. This also felt like the perfect room to display some of our trophies, like our legendary antique rifle that we got from the quest with the Thromboian Union, just as well as the legendary cutlass sword from the infamous General Shortus of the Rebels. Once we make peace, perhaps we'll need to hide that when we have President Tree over for business dealings. And something else that I had completely forgot to do to, I've been talking about how we don't have slaves anymore, and we're not really into having slaves in this colony anymore at HQ, or really under the SNR Rifle Company. We do have Nenel here, who needs to be emancipated. We would have him strip of his collar and bindings, and then have Kate go ahead and release him of his bondage from us. We were sorry that we had kept him here for so long while we had freed others, but we wouldn't give him any type of parting gift like silver, unfortunately. We felt that his freedom and his job experience here would be plenty enough. Perhaps we'll see him in the next series. Foreshadowing. Anyways, we had received word from our allies in the Outlands, the Forgotten, as well as the Thromboian Union, stating that they needed more weapons and ammunition, so we immediately began loading this up into our chopper to take off and go there. Of course, this wasn't charity work, and we weren't doing it out of the kindness of our hearts. We had something in mind that we needed from them. However, this trading will take quite a bit of time, especially to find the Forgotten. They're a bit hard to pin down nowadays, ever since Ortega was murdered. In the meantime, while we're doing some trading, Gak had rejoined our ranks back at the headquarters after he tried to cowardly run away once he saw a nuclear bomb dropped on the base. Hopefully, he has some newly instilled bravery. We would also end up performing a couple of surgeries on Commando Jr., swapping out his prosthetic arms with some new bionic arms, which Richard has been working on behind the scenes for a little while. Given the good condition of our medical room here, as well as Richard's medical skill, everything went down perfectly. We would also commission Graphics to go ahead and begin working on some new special unique armor for Commando Jr. as well. And in case you couldn't tell, we are kind of making him into a cybernetic super soldier, just as we had with Greffis, just not on the same level. However, his current cybernetics and optimized armor would make him a perfect subject for these mechs, and thus he shall be the operator of Anarchy. His first mission, he and Greffis will be going out to attack a nearby rebel city. Long gone are the days of sending out entire squadrons to try and attack settlements. Now we send out one or two people in massive death machines. Our trade mission had seemed to be successful. We ended up arriving back home shortly after the mechs left, and we had plenty of steel components, advanced components, and most importantly, a bunch of car parts. Yes, I know, you're probably sick of seeing me build so many vehicles at this point, but I promise this will be the last one. Maybe. We've built a Raptor fighter jet that will be deemed the I Mark II after our smuggler airplane that was destroyed in the nuclear blast. Mark II being a hell of an understatement, possibly the understatement of a lifetime, as this is most likely the most advanced aerial vehicle that we have ever created. It even utilized one of the persona cores that we had ripped out of a rebel mechanoid. We would send it out to provide aerial support to our massive mother class mechs and their operators. And we also packed a special payload for the rebel city just in case things were to go awry. Upon further inspection, this was a mid-sized city at best. The perfect target for what we had in mind. This wasn't about taking resources or weapons. This was simply to send a message, and maybe to get a little bit more revenge on them for nuking us. There were many a soldier here, but it should be noted that there were no civilians to be detected. It would seem that they've been evacuated shortly before we arrived, which was absolutely perfect for what we had in mind. The complete and utter freedom to annihilate every living being inside this city. We would force our mechs down their city streets and destroy what little defenses they actually had at their disposal, including many of their soldiers who were stuck between the treads of our mechs. This city seems to be used for its power generation, so we would also attack its wind turbines and solar panels as well. And for the final coup de grace, we would call in mortar strikes in two separate sections of the city from our nearby settlements, absolutely decimating their infrastructure. Many of their men and women would make a heroic last stand against us, trying to stop us from destroying their city's batteries. But I'm afraid for their sake that this would all be in vain, as they would be quickly annihilated. And with that, after many a rebel life was taken, they would begin a retreat out of the city. And as they began to flee from the city, we would as well. We had to get our mechs out of there if we were going to completely demolish it. Although we could use our mechs for this, I had something else in mind. A little cherry on top. Yes, I think that did the trick quite well, rendering this city completely uninhabitable. And with that, my friends, our righteous payback has been swiftly issued to the rebels. Normally, I would be a bit worried about a massive retaliation, but since they're fighting us, the Thromboian Union, the Marshal Service, the Forgotten, I could go on for days about the other smaller factions of the Outlands, something tells me they'll be pretty inclined to make peace with us now. Yes, indeed, things truly are coming to a head here, with everything almost back to normal, at least in terms of our clientele. But the rebels are a proud folk, and they will fight to the very last drop of blood if we don't release their prisoners, so that's what we're going to need to do before we can even attempt to make peace with them. Besides, word has it that they actually have some of our fine mercenaries imprisoned in their settlements in the Outlands anyhow, so it's kind of like a swap, you could say, an eye for an eye. Over the next couple of hours, every single rebel prisoner that we had would end up leaving, and would you look at that? It would seem that diplomacy and anarchy were exactly what we needed to kiss and make up with them. Funny enough, we're basically allied, or at least neutral, with every single large faction on the planet. Now, the smaller factions in the Outlands, not so much, and the Confederacy of Benya, also not so much, but we're not really worried about them. But now, my friends, if you'll excuse us, we have some important business meetings to attend to. Now that we're all here, and better yet, we're all at peace with the SNR Rifle Company, we need to set up some global and international laws for trading. Dibbo here, the founder of the United Traders, would end up setting up deals with us, the Marshals, and the Rebels. And the United Traders shall become their own faction, a global, completely neutral trading faction. You could kind of think of this as the Geneva Convention, except we're not setting up any rules for warfare or anything like that, specifically only for trading. Specifically who and what can and cannot be traded, and the rules of doing so. And in case you're wondering why any of the factions would even make this a priority, it is because this would drastically affect their economies, negatively or positively, and this is going to be a net positive for the entire world. And better yet for us, we are going to be a completely neutral security force to protect them. They shall be our client indefinitely. You could think of it like a business merger where we and they will be making a lot of money, which is exactly what we've wanted all along. My friends, we are winding down to the end here. Not only the end of this episode, but the end of Season 2 of the Gun Empire series, and the series as a whole, it would seem. Kinda. Not really, of course. I mean, this series is technically ending, but, you know, the universe as a whole, the RKRU, is continuing, and we will definitely see these characters again. As I mentioned at the end of last episode, I'm thinking I'm going to do the next series as a Rags to Riches style, just RimWorld Rags to Riches, I suppose. Haven't really worked out a title just yet, unfortunately, but it is going to be taking place in this universe on this planet, and it is also essentially going to be an extension of the Gun Empire series because of that. And I'm very excited for that, and I hope you guys are as well. I hope you'll stick with me through this and, you know, kind of watch that series as well. If you like the Gun Empire series, I think you'll like Rags to Riches and the other series that we end up doing in this universe as we continue it forward. I think I haven't counted before this narration here, but I think we're like 6 or 7 series in, if you count the Gun Empire seasons as one series, of course, which I would. I think we're about 7 or something like that in, so we're really far into the RKRU, and it's kind of my little baby. It's my little child, you know, and I love it, and you guys love it, and it's great. It really is, and I can't be more grateful to you guys because None of this would have been possible without you guys, these series, these seasons, none of it, and I'm eternally grateful. I really am. I know, I always say that, but I truly am, honestly. I also kind of wanted to discuss a little bit as to why I'm ending the series at Season 2 like this. I know a lot of people have been asking, and I've kind of talked about the issues that I'm having with this save file, but to kind of give a little bit more clarity, I'm really limited in this world at this point because it is from the previous save file, and we have so many mods, and so many of those mods are still outdated. A big reason is because, for one, I want to move on and I want to tell some other stories, because we're really too powerful here in this series as well, in this base. We could do just about anything we really wanted to. And it seems like a lot of you guys have noticed this as well, as I see here in a comment by our good friend Tekisas Bukani. I apologize, I know I've butchered your name, so I'm very sorry about that. But I don't want this series to become boring either, just because, like we're too strong and stuff like that. But also, like I mentioned a moment ago, we are severely limited. For example, with this save file, I can't reinstall things, so like, urns or TVs or dining chairs, basic stuff, and that actually limits me a lot more than you might think. Now, you may think to yourself, well, who gives a shit about dining chairs and stuff like that, and I agree with you, it's more of an inconvenience. However, something I wanted to do in this season that I don't think that we really got to do as much last season were these smaller operations. Like, for example, when we're at war with the rebels, I thought it might be fun if we went to some of their smaller settlements, maybe on foot or in smaller vehicles and stuff like that, and had these tinier battles like smaller operations. But I can't do that because that would require me to do things like reinstall these turrets that we can bring with us, and I can't do that. If I use the resources to try and build turrets while we're there, it'll take too long and our mercenaries will end up dying. Some other examples, not necessarily of reinstalling things, but the steel torrent mod doesn't work, so if you notice, a lot of our enemies throughout the series didn't have any vehicles that would actually move and attack us. They would stay stationary, unfortunately, and that's because Steel Torrent was the mod I was using to spawn a vehicle in with our enemies to give them that leverage and that little oomph to try and, take us out. But I can't do that because it's not working, and then the other types of vehicles from other mods don't actually move to fight us. So, I kind of had to work around that. Another example of an issue is the Factional War mod. The updated version is not working with this save file either for whatever reason, which is causing issues for me, because that means every time you're seeing these factions battle, I'm individually placing every single pawn. And you might think, well, that's not a big deal. I've used dev mode. I could just spawn in pawns, and then you could use character editor to try and give them a loadout, and that is what I used to do. But the problem is now as well with this save file, dev mode is severely limited as well. I can't actually open anything up. I'm being forced to use the pinned like options in dev mode. You can actually go in and pin them, and you can use those. Like if I want to spawn a pawn, I can pin that, but that also doesn't work. I don't know if it's an issue with the factions or what, but yeah, I can't do any of that. So I've just been extremely limited, and I didn't want to bring this up until this point because, that would ruin the fun. So I apologize if it ruins the fun or the immersion now, but that is my reason for, needing to quit at Season 2 with this world. And of course, lastly, after you've had a save file in RimWorld, and we've had this one since January of this year, they start to get pretty big and they start to stutter, so occasionally you'll see pawns kind of freeze up for a second, stuff like that. And I even upgraded my processor a few months ago before actually starting this series, and we're still having those issues. So that's another reason. It's just too big of a save file, and I kind of need to refresh and restart the world and add in all the factions and stuff like that again and give it a clean slate. But those are my reasons for needing to end the series at Season 2. I hope you guys understand. I'm sure you do. And again, I'm just so grateful that you guys have been with me through this journey, and that you've been so supportive, and that you guys have loved this, and we've made it our own series. I love you guys, I truly do. too. And, you know, once again, I am grateful. So thank you ever so much. I hope you have enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. But I almost forgot, real quick before I go, we have a name for our rebel faction. We are now going to be naming them the Republic of Libertas. Libertas being the word in Latin for liberty and or freedom. And of course, this name has been provided by our good friend MD.Akib Al-Azad. So thank you ever so much for that. Alright though guys, one final time, I love you ever so much. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you in the next series. Goodbye.